Good morning, everybody. This is Aaron the Pedantic. I'm here with Particularist. Particularist, how's it going?
Howdy. Good morning.
And y'all have seen Particularist on some of the streams that we've had previously, but I feel like I never really give him the fair introduction that he deserves. So just who he is. He's a friend of the friend on the Discord, a fellow gamer, and someone who's developing his own RPG. It's based off of original D&D, right?
Yes, over time it has definitely pulled in more concepts from AD&D, but certainly from the beginning, OD&D was where I started.
Yeah. And so I've had the opportunity to see some of those games in action, and I don't remember if I've had the opportunity to play yet, but I'm definitely on the server, so that the moment that I get the opportunity, I think I did. I think I may have for one. I do remember that it's very very snappy and very very lethal, and it looks like it's a lot of fun. But that's just a little bit of context so y'all can see kind of where we're coming from. What is most of your gaming experience? Just so.
Yeah. In terms of background, one of the topics today, One D&D. I did get started in 2013, I want to say, but I started with Numenera in this hobby, so I did not start with D&D. Now, before that, I had played a couple sessions of 3E over the years and kind of seen the D&D editions, so I was aware they existed, but I wasn't actively playing them or engaged with the community in any way. But then, of course, in 2014, we got 5E, so I've played a fair bit of that. So I do have some opinions about. I think I have an odd case where I'm very old school focused, but I do kind of appreciate what 5e is trying to do. I don't necessarily like the particular implementation, but I think what they're trying to do is okay. So it's intriguing to look at One D&D and see, would I want to play this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you've also delved into original D&D quite a bit, and some of the other retro clones and things like that.
Yeah, no, I've played. I ran fantasy medieval adventure game, White Box, FMAG, a couple of times in the server. I've been playing in AD&D lately more. Of course, I have the Ransack games, which are at this point. At one point I was calling it OD&D. At this point, eventually I think the main reason I came up with a name for it was to distinguish it because it was growing so different from OD&D, which is where it's at now. And I'm still running those games. I actually just ran a game, not yesterday, but also Saturday, for two different groups, two different sets of content. And then, yeah, I think that covers it.
Yeah. All right. And just for anybody who stumbles on my channel, they don't know, my gaming history. I started with 5e as well. Well, not as well, because you started with Numenera. 5e was my very first tabletop role-playing game. From there, I went to Dragon Age RPG and then to Dungeon Crawl Classics. Then I got into, retro clones and things like that. So that's how I ended up trying BX and Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is just BX, new BX, kind of like if you want to think of it in Coke flavors. And then we have Old School Essentials, AD&D first edition. Well, I did second edition longer than first edition, honestly. And that's how we get where we are. So anybody that stumbles on this stream, if they're expecting people that are pretty much solely immersed in 5e, you're kind of in the wrong place. For me, I followed 5e up until about Tasha's guide came out, and then Tasha's Cauldron, whatever. And then I was kind of done at that point. I really haven't had any interest in keeping up with, for my gaming purposes, I haven't had any interest in keeping up with how the things were progressing and all that, just because I could already see okay, everything up until Xanathar's, I'll allow in my game. I can work around it. I don't want to keep up with anything new after that, just because we're just getting too much of a glut of player character options that I don't really want to deal with. I know it sounds terrible to some people, but because of that, I kind of disengaged with it. So now with One D&D, I kind of have an opportunity to see, okay, what have they learned from their things that they've done over the course of all these years, and what is the future going to look like? And so that's kind of like my level of interest is seeing, how is it going to be different? What is it going to have to offer? And how could it maybe address some of the concerns that I had with fifth edition? Um, and all the while, while I'm looking at all this, and I'm really still thinking most about first edition right now. Like that's the thing that I'm still trying to get myself most deeply into is first edition AD&D. I don't know. What is your level of interest in all this?
Well, it's interesting hearing you say some of those things about glut of options and such. Certainly, that's a popular opinion. I think someone in the chat here said just the same thing a moment ago about, Errant Dragon posting that after Tomb of Annihilation, there's just too much. It's Drek. Maybe it's not good. I don't share that opinion. I actually don't mind the idea of the game. If the game is going to have character building, I feel like it might as well go all in on it. And I think that is what I'm seeing with One D&D, where you have first level feats for everyone, you have more involved backgrounds and so on. And so like the last 5e game that I played, the way we made it work, because of the complexity of building characters, we were playing with new players. So putting the book in front of them and putting several books in front of them and saying, hey, make a character was never going to work. So the DM, I worked with him. I made all the characters. I was going to be one of the players, and another guy was going to run it. And I helped the group make all their characters. So I did all the work of all the character building, like flipping through all the different books and putting together a party that wasn't going to be super min-maxed, but was going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the end result of that, I mean, you are getting a kind of superhero focused game where the DM knows who the characters are and has built a story and certain story beats in his head. So even though he's going to be running in that specific case, he actually was running AD&D modules, but with some extra layers of story beats. Personally, I think that was the way that I enjoyed 5e the most. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing 1D&D move more in that direction of character building, for better or worse. So maybe that makes it less appealing if you're old school, if you're thinking old school, where characters are simpler and build up more naturally over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because, I have 13th Age and I've read through it. I haven't had the opportunity to play or run it yet. But the whole thing with 13th Age is it really, really embraces all that, since it's, based off of 4E. In a lot of ways, it really embraces this character building concept, and it does it in such a way that, it's not overwhelmingly complex or anything like that, but it really knows that the characters are supposed to be badass, and they're supposed to have particular archetypes that they are representing. And it's not this weird middle ground that 5e did, where they had certain things that you could do that were incredible, but they also had it where you could just blow class niche into pieces, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a class system, in my opinion. You have all of the ways in which the game is actually kind of supposed to be dangerous and deadly are still there. They're represented, but at the same time, they just have so many things that subvert those things that it just kind of gets in this weird place where you can try to play it a certain way, but you're kind of defeating the purpose. And they don't really tell you exactly how you should play, other than, well, everybody should have fun. It should be about stories. Basically, very, very, I don't know, corporate, presentation of, enjoy product, consume. That's kind of like my thing there. I don't have this, an inherent hatred of character building necessarily. It's just that whenever we're talking about in the context of a dungeon crawler, where you're really supposed to be dealing with very specific types of tasks and roles that are being represented, I definitely don't want a whole lot of crossover in what, like all of the different characters can do. I kind of like, them to stay in their lane. And I don't like for things to exist in the game that are just win buttons for certain problems, if that makes sense. The moment I said that, I was like, wait a minute, Aaron, isn't the sleep spell in first edition a win button? Well, yes, sort of, but it still comes at a great cost. But more in terms of like the ranger never getting lost and things like that, which it sounds like they fixed sort of.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, just because there are definitely things in the older versions of the game where there is clearly a spell or a item or what have you, a character ability that exactly matches a problem. I think probably 5e missed the mark on certain things where the passive abilities made something too easy or irrelevant. The ranger is, of course, the example that everyone brings up, because it's just, you don't engage with this particular style of gameplay if you have a ranger. And then the other one, Goodberry, where everyone is just fed forever, or the light cantrip. Light is irrelevant. So it's not like stuff like sleep doesn't exist in the old editions. It definitely does, but it solves one problem one time and it expends a resource. Whereas in 5e, a lot of the same stuff, it's passive. It solves a category of problem permanently. So, and with 1D&D, I don't think they're attempting to bring any of that back. The first part of what you were saying, you had talked about, I'm starting to lose it. Forget. I'm blanking on it. I can't remember what I was going to reply. There was something. There was the first part of what you said that you had some thoughts.
I'm sure we'll get back to it. There will be something that we'll look at and it'll bring it up. I guess we can go through some comments real quick. I'm still hoping. So Gelatinous Rube, aka Ash of Creativity, said he would be here today. Hopefully, he will be able to make it. So hopefully he'll be here before we get into the real meat and potatoes of everything. So let's see. We have some questions that are brought up. Well, first off, it's party time. Doof is correct. It is party time because we have Yield Particularist. We also have Yield Geek in the comments. Part of the problem with 5e is that the changes are ideology driven. I wouldn't say all of them are. A lot of them do seem to be changes for gameplay reasons. They seem to have, but let's see. Was he?
Yeah, I'm very critical of the designers and the people behind the product, but to some extent, I respect some of the work that they've done. I think they definitely put the effort in and thought about it. I don't think they always hit the mark. I think they could have done a better job, but I definitely don't think everything is ideology driven. It is funny occasionally where you have the ideology informs where the design is going to go, and the designers kind of just like make it work. Like, okay, we can't use the word race anymore. We have to say species. So we're gonna develop game mechanics around the fact that we've been forced to change a word, which is funny.
But right.
It is what it is. I mean, that's the world we live in today in 2022.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot. Okay, so technically, if you look at the fact that they removed, let's see, ability score changes based off of your race and stuff like that. I mean, technically, that was ideologically driven. By there really has been none of them saying, that's bad design. It's bad design for us to have those kinds of things because of X and Y. Now, I used to make arguments about how I thought it was actually not for the best, and it was very much a modern player's argument, and that was that. Well, actually, I guess a modern DM's argument, and that was that it was reinforcing too much the specific race class combos. I was like, oh, I see this too much. I see this too much. Ironically, then I go back to I start getting into the old school stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute. There's part of this actually works in a way because it reinforces particular archetypes and particular just like facets of being this race or that race or whatever in a way that I think is positive. I think that class and level limitations are actually the better way to go when it comes to races, rather than just like +1 on this, +2 on that, especially in a game like 5e where you're going to be increasing your ability scores and you're expected to stay with the same character forever. I could make an argument for why I think that just the simple bonuses is probably not the best design, but I don't know. You have a thought? Let's hear
I do have a thought here. So this does get into the meat of 1D&D a little bit. When I was first reading the first packet they put out, which had backgrounds, they talked about the backgrounds would be a combination of a some ability score increases,
Yeah, let me
a
show
feat,
that.
and skills. And when I first read that, I thought, oh, that's great. They'll design little packages, and you will have to pick between the packages. Uh, Unfortunately, that's not really true. At the beginning of the background section, it just says you can customize and pick anything you want. So you can, in the end, you can just get any ability score increases, any feat, and any skills you want, and combine them in any fashion. What I was excited about was the idea that they would have put things together into specific packages, which meant you would have to have trade-offs. You'd have to give something up to get something. It's like, okay, if I want intelligence, I have to pick one of these backgrounds, and then I will get one of these feats, and so on. So then it becomes kind of thoughtful in terms of, what is my character's background? What am I going to pick? But in
Right.
practice, picking any of the prefab backgrounds is a mistake. You've chosen wrong. Like, if you choose Acolyte, you've chosen wrong. You're supposed to just pick the best, like, individualize your background and just pick the best stuff for your character.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. What's to stop you from saying, well, I'm not an acolyte, I'm a clergyman, and I have +2 in strength because I was always, lifting all of the beer barrels for all the other monks, and I've got I mean, it's just you're just kind of making your own thing at the end of it. I mean, to be fair, they always had it where you could create your own backgrounds and everything. So I guess it's not.
Well, just to be clear, to try to tie these ideas together, the idea in my mind when I saw the backgrounds was like, okay, instead of having your race choices be
Right.
the thing, your background, they would move all that onto backgrounds, and backgrounds would do more than they did in 5e. Because in 5e, it was just a couple of skills and a weird bonus that probably would never come up. So for the most part, when we made
with most of them, yeah.
yeah. So from most of my groups, we just said, forget the background, just pick a couple skills, because it was not important enough to matter. Here, they seemed to be beefing them up and making them something that would matter. But I think they're shooting themselves in the foot, because they have these neat little packages which could serve the same function that race used to serve. But then they're also saying you can also just pick whatever you want. Which, imagine, I mean, that's the same thing we had before, towards the end of 5e's life, where it's like, okay, we still have race, but you can just pick whatever you want and combine whatever features you want. So it dilutes it, and they just sort of don't do design work. To me, that is game design. Like, that's what their job is to design these little packages that have trade-offs.
Yeah. There's this fear of limitation that they have, or a restriction that I think is kind of bizarre, especially considering, I mean, the way that almost anybody that I know of plays is, hey, if there's something that I don't like, we're just going to change it. This is when Ash of Creativity would be like, you're not allowed to change it. Designers #1.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with the trade-offs idea. If you're letting players choose whatever they want in any combination they want, they're always going to min-max and just take the best set of options.
Right.
And this is part of the reason, I was giving my example of the last 5e game that I played in, where we had one player, myself, make the characters for a party of, I think we had 6 players, maybe 5. And I just made everyone's characters so that we wouldn't min-max and we could have interesting characters. If the designer designs little packages, that sort of forces the idea of interesting characters to happen. I don't know. It's definitely very, we talked about character building. I think there's a fine balance to be struck between character building, where you can just choose anything willy-nilly, and character building where you have to kind of mix and match blocks of sets of things together. I mean,
that's
sorry,
pretty fair.
I was going to say ransack to shill my own stuff. Umbry is always in the chat posting about ransack backgrounds, because that's what I did. I put things in packages that the characters had to take one package. If they could mix and match abilities, they would end up being more powerful than a package which has been designed with trade-offs.
Right. And that's a great point. Whenever I think about most of whenever people talk about, doing multi-classing and things like that in kind of the older editions, I tend to think in terms of, well, I know some people are going to cringe because they're going to think of like, I don't know, 2E problems perhaps, but I think I almost would prefer just a whole new class rather than having it where you're going to be, mixing a whole bunch of things and creating all these, subclasses and things that are just kind of, like throw this on top of it, throw this on top of it, throw this on top of it. That's I don't know, just because then it has more of a holistic approach to it.
Definitely. That reminded me, that's another thing where One D&D is really turning into a sludge. They moved the capstone stuff from level 20 to level 18.
Yeah.
So now they've essentially codified multi-classing into the game, where every character, it's clear the intent is to say you should never actually go to level 20. You should always take at least 2 multi-class levels. And that's what that says to me when I see that.
That's a fair point. I'm sure that what they were reacting to was all the people that said, well, we never get to experience the capstone abilities. All we get are these ribbon abilities at 18 that nobody likes or that really don't change the game. So I think that may be where they were reacting from, because that was something I was always hearing.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of goofy, right? Because the whole point of putting it at level 20 was to say, in order to earn this, you must give up taking a couple levels of multi-class. And now they're saying, well, you're not, because no one's willing to do that. They're like, fine, you can have both. We'll just give you both. So it's just power creep.
I know there are going to be people that are like, well, nobody ever gets, to that level anyway. So why even worry about it? But I've been in, let's see. I mean, I've only played 5e for, a few years, like continuously. But like, I guess 3 out of 4 of my long campaigns that I've been part of all got to level 20. So
we definitely never went to 20. The only time we ever played at 20 was if we made some characters for Tomb of Horrors, like the original Tomb of Horrors, using 5e characters. That was the only time we ever played with level 20 characters.
Well, I mean, once we got to 20, it's like, oh, I think we're done. So we didn't really enjoy it in the sense of enjoy. Can you really enjoy it? Well,
that is something I think they would be well served by content or character options that say, okay, you're now here at level 20. Here's, they have the epic boons, but that's not all that much. It's not that interesting.
Oh yeah. It
would be nice to see you're going to sit at 20 and play the game for a while and do certain things. I suppose that might not be very popular if they published like a 20th plus level adventure path, but it's an interesting thought.
It would be interesting to see them try to create, competent adventures for, characters of that, that magnitude. Because
something chat has been going on about is skills, which we haven't been talking about.
Oh yeah. I was gonna get through the comments, but what are they saying about skills?
Well, there's a lot of talk about skills and whether skills are good or bad. The reason it caught my eye is because this was another thing I took notes on. I was a bit. It makes sense but it's still surprising to see it. They added the study action to look at something.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so I pick up a glass in the game and say, DM, I want to roll my study action. What am I holding? It's a glass. It's just, to me, it's getting down into, I don't know. It's in the cleric and species is the one I have open.
Okay.
I don't know if it's in the other ones.
But yeah,
study.
There you go. The study action. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's have a little look-see.
I know a lot of the old school players are probably thinking skills are terrible for the game. And I agree a fair amount. But since they are leaning into skills so heavily, it's just funny to see something such a basic component of the game, the idea of asking the DM questions about the environment, have to get codified like this.
Yeah. There's a particular issue that I see here. Okay. So as you pointed out, the fact that we now have this as an action means that, it's expected that a player can just say, I want to study, I want to study or something like that. And then you make an intelligence check. So it's telling you, it's telling the DM at this point, you're supposed to let them make an intelligence check. I mean, now theoretically, I would say a good DM would know that you can just simply say you know it or you don't know it. And because it's either, well, I mean, there's the middle ground where you do rolls, but some people forget about the fact that if there's no reason that you should know it at all, like there's no way that you would know it, then there's no roll. If there's no way that you wouldn't know it, there's no roll. A lot of people seem to forget that.
There's
but
definitely...
I don't like the language.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's the thing. There's definitely a push for roll dice for everything that you want to do in the game. Personally, I never liked the idea of knowledge skills as a number that you're going to roll against. When we ran 5e, we always treated the knowledge skills as a binary, where if you had them, that meant you were going to get certain knowledge automatically. And maybe there were occasions where knowledge was, rare enough or hard enough to discern that we would do a roll. But for the most part, I preferred treating those knowledge abilities as either you have them or you don't.
I think that's pretty fair. Overall, as far as skills go, I don't like whenever skills encroach on what we expect a particular class to be good at. So whenever we have anybody just being able to do an Arcana check, I feel like, oh, that's kind of encroaching on the magic users, territory. Whenever we have anybody being able to do sleight of hand, in order to do various thiefy tasks, I feel like that's encroaching on the rogue. That's part of the reason why the bard is such a bastard class to me in 5e, is because of the fact that theoretically the bard can do anything that almost any other class can do skill wise and do it better, assuming that they have the stats, because they get expertise. But they are changing the way sort of that expertise works now that they're kind of broadening it a little bit. But I'm still not wild about it. I mean,
this calls back to the idea of trade-offs, where if you want that arcana knowledge or that sleight of hand ability, the only way to get it was to go all in on a particular class. Where now, if I want arcana, I need to be a magic user. If I want sleight of hand, I need to be a thief, or wizard or magic user, or wizard or rogue, whatever they're calling them now. I've gotten so used to the old school stuff that I can't help but say those names.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely something I prefer. I would love it if those knowledge skills, frankly, I don't think they should be in the skills list. It would, in my mind, they should be part of it. They should be a class feature for specific classes. If you're if you're a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock, you have arcana knowledge. That would be the game that I would write if I was writing a post 5e game.
Yeah. In fact, I would even go to the point where I would say that if you're a wizard, then Arcana, you get expertise. If you are if you're like a sorcerer, maybe you're proficient. If you're a warlock, maybe you have like half proficiency or something.
Yeah,
because oh, go ahead.
That would be a way to keep it. If you were going to keep the existing skills list and keep it on there, then yes, that would be perfect. You could just give them that expertise, that extra buff, so they go that extra mile.
Right. Yeah. And but alas, we have it differently. I mean, so that is one thing I didn't look at too terribly closely, and that was the way that they limit your proficiency getting in skills. I mean, obviously you could get just about anything you want through background, as far as getting one or two of them. But I am curious about
the expert classes document is the one I did not open and look at much. I looked at this stuff last night. So these are actually just for the audience's sake, these are my first impressions of One D&D. I have only opened up these PDFs last night and glanced through them. I've been avoiding One D&D stuff before this because I figured I'd wait until it was further along before I looked at it.
Yeah, let's see here. All right. Or any 3 skills of your choice. Okay, that's for Bard. Maybe it's different for other classes because Bard is supposed to be the one that can get anything they want. Ranger. Let's see, Ranger proficiencies.
I think Ranger is another.
It's limited. Okay. Which it used to be, which is good. It used to be limited, but at the same time, you could still grab something from your background. How do they do expertise though? Okay, any skill proficiencies of your choice. Yeah, I don't like it. It's, I mean, so
to talk about skills more generally and my experiences with them in 5e and why I don't like them. For one thing, a new player looking at it is like, okay, what are all these skills? Now you have to explain, okay, every skill. And then it's like, okay, which ones are actually going to come up in the game? Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on the dungeon master, because certain skills, the dungeon master either will never think of, they won't put them in his adventures. Something I've been curious about, I would love to do this. Well, if I had infinite time, I would go through the 5e modules and tally up what skill checks are actually called for, because I would be very surprised if it was at all balanced. I bet there are some skills that almost never get requested and skills that get requested all the time in the official published modules. I have this claim that I like to make, which is that no one has ever written a 5e adventure, because I think if you were to genuinely sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a 5e adventure, the character sheet, every option on the character sheet should be represented in the adventure. So in my mind, the list of skills is almost a checklist for a designer to say, okay, I should put things in the module that will interact with each of these skills. And I'm sure no one writes an adventure that way. No one.
I mean, yeah, probably not. I would think. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I really haven't thought of it. I mean, so you definitely want to make it so that your character classes aren't going to sit there twiddling their thumbs their entire time. But as far as like representing all the skills, I don't know. Maybe I'm still too stuck on the idea of a class system when we really are kind of like losing that. Let's see. Well, let's look at some comments for a bit. Let's see what we have here. Here we have Errant Dragon. Tomb of Annihilation is the 1.5e adventure that highly recommends having multiple backup characters ready. And then it's also one of the best ones that I've read, in my opinion.
I don't know in any of the 5e games that we ran. For the most part, almost no one died. There was one particular player who's unbelievably bad at getting himself killed. And then, of course, when I ran proper Tomb of Horrors, we did have a couple of deaths. But for me, I don't think... I'm sure this will offend everyone in the old school side of things, but I genuinely think if you're going to run 5e, the characters probably just shouldn't die. Superhero. I mean, to me, it's a superhero game, and superheroes don't die.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like if you are trying to make it a game that is dangerous, you are working against the system. I think that is true. And I say that as somebody who was running a 5e game specifically with the intention of running it as a dungeon crawler, with more of like an old school feeling. And I feel like I accomplished that to a degree, but I had already like tinkered enough with, how I ran things from previous campaigns and what I had learned about ways that they can circumvent certain things and what kinds of challenges can I present. And I also pulled up a lot of things from old school D&D in order to learn how do you handle dungeon turns, how do you handle resources, making a difference and all that kind of stuff. And it was definitely a task. And even with everything that I did, it was still not terribly deadly. So I think there's some merit to what you're saying, that it really does lend itself to playing like a superhero game, or at least comparable to, prior editions.
For me, it's always in terms of the ratio of the amount of time you spend making the character. If you spend 8 hours making a character and then die in 25 minutes, you've wasted your time. You should not have. You in the future, you're going to be like, okay, if I can die in less time than I'll make a character, I'm going to cut corners on making the character in the first place, and it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, you could definitely run a game where you say put players in the PHB only. Certainly, if I was expecting death in a 5e game, I would probably be focused on the PHP only. And I know Yield Geek had said that a while back. By the way, just to correct something I said for Yield Geek's sake, I ran the AD&D version of Tomb of Horrors straight out of the physical published AD&D module using 5e characters. But not, I know I've looked at the 5e version. This is something that we've discussed a bit. Sorry, this is a total digression, but
oh, it's fine. That's what this is for.
There's a guy on YouTube, EXP to level 3, who was running
I saw his video. Yeah,
the 5e version of Tomb of Horrors, and it is so bad. Like you fall into a pit and take 5 points of damage or something. It's like, yeah, well, I have 200 hit points, so I don't care. A completely different experience from the original version, where you fall into the pit and it's full of sharpened spikes with poison that just kill you instantly. Or, hopefully at that character level you have a neutralized poison available, but very different experience. Something I was blown away by in that video, just to continue the digression, I guess, is the idea his players were. It's a Tomb of Horrors. It's the Tomb of Horrors. It's like a trap module, and they just prepared like fighting types. They brought no spells. They brought no resources to it, like to solve problems. So maybe that's who the 5e crowd is. This was something I was thinking about earlier. The idea of 5e. This is what you were talking about. The thing I was blanking on. The idea of who 5e appeals to. It attempts to appeal to a very broad set and doesn't necessarily actually satisfy all the broad different types of people it's trying to appeal to, because it's, there's certain old school things in there that don't really work out in practice in 5e. And I was thinking about this for One D&D. Is it attempting to appeal to exactly the same set of broad set? Is it trying to be that big tent game, or is it narrowing itself and focusing more heavily on specific aspects? And I think it definitely is, based on what I'm seeing in these documents.
And so what exactly group would you say that would be?
Definitely the character building stuff is in there, because I mean, we talked about the example of level 18 having the capstone abilities moved up, and how that, to me, that says everyone should multi-class, and multi-classing to me is like the quintessential like min-max power gamer character building activity. I hate multi-classing and would never normally do it, but power gamers seem to love that. So the fact that they're seemingly encouraging it suggests they are encouraging that specific crowd. It is true that even in our games, we often said everyone gets a feat at first level. So the fact that they're adding that into backgrounds isn't a huge change for us, even though we were not into that power gaming aspect of things. It does let you customize your character more. I think they're giving up with things like the study action and other stuff. I think they're stripping out the old school appeal. I really don't think 5e was ever a good game. If you wanted to run an old school game, people will argue about it. They'll say, okay, I ran a deadly game with death, whatever. But for me personally, I never wanted to run 5e that way. The thing is, people's experiences are so different, right? Because some of these guys probably have their friend group. They only want to play 5e. So if they can run 5e old school, that meets them halfway, because they're forced to play 5e anyway. Wow. For me, that's never been a problem. My group doesn't care what game we run. They'll run anything. So there was never a need. We never had a need for like the big, most popular D&D to be to appeal to us specifically. If we wanted to run an old school game, we were more than happy to go back and look at AD&D or now I'm working on my own game.
Yeah. Well, you need I would say like hardcore gamers for that, I think, just because a lot of the gamers that I know, they tend to be pretty casual. They don't want to have to buy any new books. They don't have to study any rule books. They like they once they've gone over the point where they've learned, hey, I've learned the game that everybody's playing. I don't need to learn anymore unless it's just to keep up with the game that everybody's playing. A lot of people don't want to put in the time to understand how anything else works unless it's really, really simple. I think that's why rules light games have become so prolific. Well, that and just how easy they are. Well, not easy they are. How much simpler they are to make. In comparison to the big honkers with lots of little nuances and things like that to learn. So for me, I kind of raised my hand there when it comes to where you're talking about,
Yeah.
you're stuck with 5e. I'm not terribly, like, I feel like if I asked, they would do it. But at the same time, I know that I would be asking them to get different books, to actually read the books to some degree, kind of. Like, that's kind of why I was leaning toward maybe doing BX or something, is because then they don't really have to learn anything for
Yeah.
BX.
This is another difference with the specific players. Do you have players who are compelled to actually get the books and read them? Our group, the DM in both, I mean, me and one other guy are kind of like the actual guys who own all the books, and all the other players they show up with nothing, and we hand them books. So everyone will be handed a PHB from the giant stack of PHBs on the shelf behind the DM for 5e, as an example. I'm sure different play groups are different about this. I mean, certainly anyone, Adventurers League, for example, anybody going to that is going to show up with their own book. And the idea of trying to make that work for other games is odd.
I would say at least half of my group would. I feel like at least half of them would. The other ones, I feel like there's one that wouldn't. And then there are several others that I think would maybe. It's hard to say just because of the fact that we have such a thing as D&D Beyond. So like they can build characters. And that's usually the function that most players are worried about, is just, putting the character together so that, hey, I'm ready to run the game now. As far as actually like studying to understand how the rules work and all that, a lot of people just kind of want to learn as they go, just because it's easy. It's easy. It doesn't take that much. Now, whenever I was first playing, I had already read the PHB several times. I had studied it quite thoroughly. I had, created all kinds of characters just as practice. But that's just the kind of person I am. I'm obsessive when it comes to trying to understand things that I'm interested in. I did want to say, whenever you're talking about, not being, that it wasn't suited for old school play. This thing that Yield Geek said here about starter set options only.
There you go.
That is something that works really well. And I mean, I would include the broader spell list, at least some of them. I think there are some Xanathar spells that kind of started going, ooh, it's kind of, and then it just kind of went downhill from there. But as far as like the character options in the starter set are really, really, really solid, and they're very archetypal, and it just feels like you're just playing like BX with more with a little bit more there.
Yeah, because the original in the PHB, especially for those first 4 classes, and then in the starter set, they each come with a default archetype, and the archetype, the subclass, is you're the fighter
champion, the evocation wizard.
They're very archetypical. They're like the standard. Whereas all the other subclasses, they definitely do the thing that you were saying you don't like, where you could practically rename them, where the fighter subclasses could be called fighter. They could just take the same words from the classes. Like the champion is the fighter.
He's a fighter. He fights.
The arcane, the Eldritch Knight is the magic user subclass for the fighter. So it's like you're combining 2 classes practically.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't get the full benefits, and Eldritch Knight is one of the. And I'm sure if Ash were here, he'd be talking about how much the Eldritch Knight stinks. So it doesn't complete the fantasy. But regardless, the concept is there of combining 2 classes. But yeah, the starter set, I mean, people talked up the starter set for so long because it's a classic dungeon crawl. There's a nice little town. There's some nice dungeons to explore. You get the basic characters, and like you were saying, it could feel a lot like a BX game.
All right. So I promised I'd go through comments. Let's go through comments. So Unscripted and Unchained, aka Bloodworth, he says, my 1E group started just slightly above Dirt Farmers. Now 18 months later are approaching being powerful at level 7 to 9. That sounds on par for 1E. Let's see. My 1E group are currently level 0. What the hell is that? Level 0? That's insane. How dare you? I like level 0 for DCC. You know, for I've done it for I did a like couple sessions at level 0 for 5e just so that they would have like an investigation type scenario. And it actually went really well. It can be fun, but you know, this is one of the grand topics in the pedantic Discord is that the you know
Mudcore?
the mudcore thing where, you know, people get stuck in I'm going to keep my characters at levels 1 to 3 or something so that they're really vulnerable and it's really deadly and all that kind of stuff, and that you're missing out on a lot of what the game has to offer if you don't let it grow beyond that. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely we had 4 people in chat last night in voice chat. Just to briefly digress, someone was even asking about the Discord link. Some of those voice chats during the afternoons or night are great. If you want to hear some old guys, some old hands talk about the game and their experiences. Well, in any case, the specific topic was the level rate and progression, and what specifically there was the idea of the player skill matching the character level. The idea that, you know, if your group is new and they're still making basic mistakes, it very well may make sense to stay at those low character levels. Whereas if your group is more experienced, you might do something to push them along a little further. Certainly, if the players are getting bored, where they're like, okay, I've cast the sleep spell for the 1000th time. I'm bored of sleeping a group of goblins. Can we move on from this to some new gameplay? Then, if you should probably indulge them. Sometimes it's because of the DM. The DM doesn't feel comfortable running higher level content, but that's what modules are for. There's certainly plenty of AD&D modules which support higher character levels. I was just running through all the Dragon magazines yesterday, so I know for a fact there are expert level modules. BX is not just B. The X does exist. I claim that it doesn't exist because I never see anyone running expert stuff or see anyone running character levels higher than that. I suppose this is a good chance to share my anecdote where the local OSE group, my character hit level 3 and I was asked to retire the character because he was too powerful. So I tell everyone that
I'm a cleric with 2 level 1 spells. I better stop.
Yeah. So I tell everyone I'm the champion of BX. I won the game.
You won the game.
Level 3. But yeah, so for me, my preferred leveling rate, I agree with the 5th edition idea. 5th edition makes the first 2 character levels 1 and 2, very explicitly into like tutorial levels. The XP requirements are way lower than anything else. It's very easy to get up to 3, and then it slows way down. It's like 300, 900, 2700. So it really ramps up. And for me personally, if I'm running a game, I'm going to run a game where if the players play well, they are going to hit level 2 and level 3 each with only 1 session. They can screw up and it'll take longer, or they can die and now they're back to square 1. But I would like them to get up to level 3 as fast as possible. And then from there, they're going to have to work. I mean, even in AD&D, you have the it grows like a fighter, for example, 0 to 200, 2000 XP, 4000 XP, 8000 XP. So if you keep that same rate, things slow down naturally.
Right. Yeah. So, what I did with my game, I mean, I never really put that much of a focus on. Okay, so my 1E game, I tried to go as by the book as possible as far as their XP progression, and I was using, Hamlet and Against the Slave Lords, for like as far as like how much treasure there it was, it was all in there. So because of that, the progression was kind of like what was intended, I guess, intended. But whenever I did my public game, that was BX, with that one, it went a lot more rapidly. With that one, I was using the old OD&D rule, 100 XP per hit die for monsters, which that really pushes things going a lot faster. And as far as the amount of treasure that I put in, it was with that one, I was using the random treasure generation, per dungeon level, basically. And I was trying to do that as faithfully as possible. And we ended up getting, characters up to level 7. It didn't take terribly long. I mean, let's see, that game lasted for at least 6 months, I want to say. And we got to we got characters to level 7. But they were playing multiple times per week. So there, it is a little bit different there. It becomes a very different game at that point, especially in BX, where there's nothing saying that there are very strict limitations with like raise dead or anything like that. You have it. They're weak. They need to rest. But yeah, death is really not an issue that much anymore.
I have some thoughts there on leveling, and you mentioned how often you were playing the game.
Yeah.
The chat's going to yell at me again and say this guy's wrong. I feel like today you can't go home again, basically, in terms of D&D. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was nothing else going on. The internet didn't exist. When you were playing, you were potentially playing every day of the week. At least that was the case for, I forget who it was, the guy who always played with Gygax. He wanted to play so much that he would get solo sessions with Gygax. I don't want to say the wrong name, so I'm not going to say it. Maybe someone in chat can tell me who it was. But
yeah, when you're talking about the guy, I don't I don't know specific.
There was some specific player who was playing with Gygax one-on-one practically every night of the week.
Was it Rob Kuntz?
I do think that's who it was. I do think it was Kuntz.
Don't call him Kuntz.
I don't know how to say his name.
We're not monetized now. How dare you? I'm kidding.
But today it's much harder to get a group together, especially if you're an adult. Especially if you have children, you're probably only playing every week at the most, if not only every couple of weeks or even once a month. For me, I think that justifies a higher rate of leveling, but to each their own on that one. I could imagine running a slower paced game if my players were playing more often.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm retirement age, I'll definitely take my sweet ass time. But in the current time, I'm okay with things being a little bit more rapid. And just my personal opinion, whenever you're talking about player level, like the player's abilities, player's skills, kind of like being something that could be tied to what character levels they should be dealing with. There was that passage in the DMG about if you have a neophyte player, that it's good to like run a session with them to get them like to experience the low level play before they ever experience anything higher level. I think that there's some wisdom to that in that. I think that it's crucial to experience it, to experience all of those not just for the fact that you can understand what your characters are capable of or whatever, but just because the sheer experience of just being so damn vulnerable as a character and having to rely on your wits and, what you bring with you and all that. I think that it's incredibly valuable. And that's something that you don't really get so much in the 5e experience. I don't think that's going to change with 1D 1D&D. That, you know, because they do so much to kind of circumvent those things. You know, the game is a lot less lethal. As far as tools are really not as important because cantrips replace them, and cantrips are becoming even more prevalent now that we have like paladins and rangers getting them. Yeah, it's
I hadn't seen that, but it makes sense.
they are. Yeah, it pisses me off greatly. I would say that nobody should have cantrips. I feel like if you want to have cantrips, just, you know, I can't remember which edition it was, but one of them did it where they were kind of like half a spell level or something like that. You know, maybe that was Pathfinder.
I think even in 3rd edition, cantrips cost a slot. Like they had
Yeah.
their own slots.
I think they took like half a slot or something like that. I think that that's a lot better than just being like, oh, you know, take the light cantrip and then you never really have to worry about torches. You can always just put a light on something and then pass it to the person in the front. You got light. You know, you never have to worry about running out of it. Just those various facets. You know, same thing with mold earth. You know, mold earth being able to just, you don't need chalk. You can just, you know, kind of like do a little indentation in the stone. You know, just all those things. It makes adventuring gear pointless. That's actually there was a video that Matt Colville did a little bit back, saying like, why do you have dungeons, or what are dungeons for, or something like that. And, you know, the whole thing that he was talking about was that the game is not a dungeon crawler. It's basically it's a fantasy combat simulator. And I think that that's a really fair point. You know, 5e especially, it is just a fantasy combat simulator. When you look at every other facet of what the game offers, it's just very surface level. You know, like when you're talking about the act of adventuring, it's, you know, roll a d20 and use a skill. So we have one system that kind of handles just about everything. And it's not a very in-depth system. When you look at the procedures that the DM is supposed to use in order to handle those bits of play, there's nothing. There's like in the DMG, there's 2 pages maybe on how to build a dungeon. But as far as like how to actually handle dungeon crawling, there's nothing. In the PHB, they have how, you know, here's what adventuring gear does. You know, here's what a candle does. Here's what a block and tackle does. But as far as like, you know, how's it supposed to be implemented? How is the progression of, you know, like handling things? There's just no procedures. There's nothing there. It's just figure it out, have fun, whatever.
Yeah. The advice for DMs. I mean, gets back to the thing with DMs and what is it, like 6,000% difference between the number of players and DMs. There's 600 players for every 1 DM in the 5e space. I think the official D&D Discord, apparently people were noticing that they could see these numbers, and they actually changed how their Discord works to prevent people from seeing the number of players compared to the number of DMs, because they were so embarrassed. They wanted to hide the truth. This just happened. This was like people were talking about it in the chat, in your Discord chat. I mean, over the last couple days. But yeah, one of the things we were saying got me thinking on the so-called "you can't go home again" idea that I've claimed. The player group size is so much less. Often you only have 3 players these days, whereas in the past you might have had 6 or 10 even. And I know some of the online games we've run for old school groups have had way more players. But to tie this into the paladins and the rangers getting cantrips, I really think a lot of that is driven by the small player group sizes, where they feel compelled to give more abilities to more characters, because the group size is only going to have 3 characters. So the group might not have a cleric. They might have a paladin instead. So they'd think, okay, well, we have to give cleric cantrips to paladins now. I don't know if that's actually what they did, but I'm assuming it's probably that.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, and you know, my easy solution is hirelings, motherfuckers, hirelings. You know, and you know, no, we don't want to have this giant extra character sheet for every little hireling that we have. do an abridged version, just treat it like a resource. It doesn't have to be super complicated. I used hirelings in that 5e game that I was talking about, and I used BX character sheets, or like BX character stats for the hirelings, and it was easy. It worked. It was fantastic. They did all kinds of dungeon crawling with these hirelings, and hirelings are great. Like
Isn't it
it's
Tasha
D&D.
that had the sidekicks?
They had the sidekicks thing. Yeah, I don't really know anybody that's actually implemented them that much.
I don't think we ever used them, but that would be a different solution to the problem. It would be that's the thing in 5e. The characters are so complicated that if you make the hirelings also full-fledged player characters, it gets a bit harder. But something like sidekicks, if they had like stripped down character creation for specifically for hireling or henchman type characters who could fill in some of those gaps, I think that would if you were going to run an old school game using the rules, I think that would be cool. I do think modern players who, I keep using the superhero word, I really do think the players themselves also think of 5e in terms of superheroes. And I guess Batman does have Robin as a sidekick, for example, but the sidekicks, I mean, like the Marvel universe, for example, how many of those characters have sidekicks? I feel like the idea of sidekicks didn't take off just because it doesn't appeal to the fantasy of the players of 5e.
They want pets.
Yeah,
that's what I've noticed. They want pets. That's the big thing. I haven't really seen many people in any 5e games that I've been in that have any interest in, bringing someone along in their adventures, unless I don't know, unless there's got to be some very specific motivation. It's not just because we need an extra hand, but I mean, part of that might be because they don't need an extra hand. So it may be kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, no, I guess kind of like a circular, chicken and the egg situation, because, they never really needed anything to begin with. So now we're going to make the design even more so that they don't need other people, so we end up going back in a row.
Yeah.
They did. I mean, I know that Tasha's sidekicks thing was stripped down as far as like, it would be a lot easier to create those characters. Still a little bit more complicated than I would like, for that purpose. I'd like to keep it dead ass simple, that's why for me, like just doing BX stuff seemed a lot more appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, in basically all of my old school games, the players have henchmen. They often control two characters. They'll have their main character and then a second henchman. Certainly, I'm not sure if there's actually been any cases where the main character died. The players they've been very lucky about bullying their henchmen into taking risks. It's like, okay, roll a reaction check. Oh, you rolled double sixes. I guess fine. You convince your henchman to take the risk, and then the henchman dies.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things that are lost with these old school principles being buried. That it saddens me, because there are, like, I see people playing games that I could tell that they would like it if they tried using X thing or Y thing, like morale checks for the enemies, hirelings and just everything. I mean, okay, if you're running a game where you're literally just treating it like a superhero fantasy campaign, then yeah, I guess hirelings and things like that would be a complete waste. And I guess honestly, that's probably where most people are. I guess that's where most people's heads are. It's just that I kind of feel like they haven't been shown that there is something else, because I don't know about other people's experiences, but even with me playing in several different groups locally, whenever you're dealing with what the DMs are running, it's very much the Critical Role style campaign. And now I'm gonna say that, but I'm gonna also clarify that I've only watched the first campaign of Critical Role, and I only watched like 70 episodes of it, or listened to. I don't really watch it. There's nothing to look at. Sure. But just the way that it ran there, it's very, very heavily on the plot, on the character development, their personalities, the drama, the things that unfold. I mean, there is combat and things like that, but and it can be lethal. I'm not one of the people that subscribes to the idea that it's scripted. I don't say it's scripted or anything like that. I think at most they may have some like bullet points that they want to hit as players or as DM, but I don't think that's too. I think that the DM thing is pretty common, but as far as the player thing, I think it's a little different than what I'm used to. But that seems to be kind of like the prototypical play style that I see that is all over the place whenever I see other people running their games. And if you are running in that way, then just a dungeon crawl is just a pointless concept to you, in my opinion. I mean, I just don't see it being a thing. And it's sad because I think that if they would try it, they would probably like it. Not all of them, but some of them. Because some people are just allergic to resource management. Go ahead.
Well, we always did both. I mean, we would have 5e games. We typically the DM. I usually did not DM the 5e games. I did DM Horde of the Dragon Queen, but the DM, I talked about the most recent game I had played in where we had the handcrafted party of characters. The DM was running AD&D modules, so we were kind of mixing and matching the idea of our characters are these special folks with their own stories, which would happen either kind of at the beginning or end of the session. So there'd be a certain amount of time relegated for that. And then in the middle of the session, or maybe, a session might, a particular dungeon delve might spread across a couple sessions. And then at the very beginning and end of the adventure, we would focus on character stuff to a greater degree than like AD&D downtime stuff. But we were doing proper dungeons in between. I do think you can mix and match. You can mix and match.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know. Maybe that a lot of groups are not.
Yeah, no, for real. Like whenever I've been a player in a 5e game, I really can't think of any serious proper dungeon delves that I've been a part of. So I've been in. Okay. When I say that, I'm talking about something that's more than the 5-room dungeon. Because to me, the 5-room dungeon is just an appetizer. That's not really, you're not really expending a whole lot of resources. Typically, you're not dealing with the potential for getting lost, very likely, for needing to, needing to do much mapping, just kind of memorize where you've explored, what, and yet you aren't really in it for long enough to get a strong understanding of what the place's identity is, get a really strong feeling for it. And so that's to me, like with the 5-room dungeon, I feel like it's barely a dungeon,
Oh yeah. I would never do the 5-room dungeon thing.
I've done it, but it's I mean, to me, it's just, it doesn't, it's like, it's not really using those muscles, in my opinion.
Yeah. In order to do proper resource management, I think things need to be a bit longer. So for me, even I mentioned the OSE group locally, we were running 2-hour sessions. So we were trying to fit things into 2 hours. I struggled to figure out what the exact number of rooms and like content needed was for that. And it was somewhere around 10 to 13. And that's for a 2-hour session. So I feel like a 5-room is just, I mean, maybe 5e is just the sessions are going so slow that 5 rooms makes sense. But I don't know. You're not really, it's not a dungeon. You're not dungeon delving. You're not, you're never going to go into a 5-room dungeon and think, gee, can we risk going into the next room or do we need to leave?
Right.
I feel like that would never happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do we need to go back to town for resources? Are we too low on spells to continue? Those those kinds of things, I mean, hell, in our old school essentials game, there were points where somebody, they took a few hits in one combat, and then they're like, we can heal. We've got enough to heal everybody, and then maybe we could go to explore another room, and if we get in another combat, then we may be fucked. We might just have to call it a day. But at the same time, it was enjoyable because like they had to consider those kinds of things. It's not really something they have to consider much. Part of that is built into the whole. I mean, just the prevalence of healing. I mean, with short rests, you get a lot of your resources back. Just on a short rest. Not really spells necessarily, but as far as HP goes, and if you're able to get so much, oh my God, that just reminds me of how mad I am still that they're making it where you get all of your hit dice back on a long rest.
Oh,
yeah,
it's possible we were playing 5e that way anyway. I
shame.
think there might be a number of changes that they were making that are based on just giving in and being like, okay, the players thought this was the rule and everyone played it this way, so we're just going to give in and make the rule work that way, even though we had intended something that was a little more balanced. It's sort of giving ground to things that are easier to remember rather than what would actually make sense for game balance.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So we got. Oh, go ahead.
I should add the caveat. We actually almost always played with the like hardcore or whatever it was, where you had it took a week, like a long rest was a week.
Oh,
you had to go back to town.
The slow healing rules.
Yes,
slow natural healing.
Well, not the natural healing, but the like recovering spell slots. Even
yeah.
You know, I liked the game better that way. I feel like the everyday thing is kind of like good for a pulpy action style game where you're spending time in like a city more and you're like constantly every day you're go go go. But if you're running a longer campaign, I really liked the 1 week thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never tried that, so I don't know where I stand on it. We didn't really. We used 1-to-1 time. I was trying to figure out why is it that the cadence was not so fast in my 5e game. We used 1-to-1 time. So they had their chance in the dungeon, and then after that, a week's passed. What did you do during the week? So that kind of thing.
Maybe we were actually on the same page.
Roughly,
coming from different ways.
Yeah. The only difference would be that if they left in the middle of the session, rested and went back, then they were able to get. But I don't think that really happened. I don't think that ended up happening. So Yield Geek, he says, I prefer the 1E skill system, no skills, just a profession roll on a table in the DMG, wing it from there. I also like that a lot because you have skills built into the thief, and that's enough for me. As far as like your profession oriented thing, that worked well. We did that in the 2E game that I played in, where I was a priest of Martha, the agricultural deity. And so I had like a farmer background, sort of, was kind of like my occupation. I had non-weapon proficiency. I know that this is deeper than what you're talking about, but I had non-weapon proficiencies related to just that kind of lifestyle. And it was neat. It came up enough to add a little bit, so whenever it came to like doing herbalist things or like talking to farmers about their issues with their crops and stuff like that, my character was good at it. When it came to all of this these broad categories, it's not like everything that involves wisdom I'm really good at, and then just all of that, not wild about that. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, the having just a profession role means that the skills that you're getting from that profession are less. I think I'm going to drop that thought and come at this from another direction. To me, the skills, I don't like the general skills list. For me, I think the skills need to be designed specifically for what are the players actually going to do during the game. So the thief skills are perfect because they are all you're definitely going to do each of these things. Some of the other characters' skills, I like the idea of the magic user having the arcane knowledge, the cleric having history and religious knowledge. I like the idea of the fighter being very good at swimming, running, jumping, those kinds of things. And I would rather they be for me personally, for the game that I would love. Like if I was writing a game, the way I would write it is that they're tied to the class, and they're very heavily tied to what the players are actually doing. And other types of skills we would forget about. I don't care about their basket weaving ability or whatever.
I mean, there's some truth to that. I think there are edge cases where it can be like, oh, that's cool that this actually is going to come in helpful at one point. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
On one hand, it can be fun where a player really does have a background or some profession in their character's history that is relevant and does come up. On the other hand, it can get annoying when the player is like, yeah, I used to be a fisherman. Does that mean I'm really good with, I don't know, something goofy? And they're trying to argue for it. And it's like
creating traps, because after all, a fishing line is a trap, right? So
yeah,
clearly I should be good at finding and disabling traps.
yeah.
And,
This gets into the, I should put myself in the EOTB mode, I guess, and think in terms of a game. Because I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that perspective of this is a game, we're showing up to play a game, and the whole, like, we're going to argue about whether the fisherman has traps is just like a huge waste of everyone's time. I mean, that is definitely a perspective, a hardcore perspective on the game. Possibly not. I mean, it's just so odd. I haven't played 5e in a while, and like ostensibly we're talking about One D&D in the stream, and I do think there's such a huge culture gap. And even coming into old school, I think a lot of people are bringing that culture with them, and it's just the culture of like the truly old school is just so different. So especially if you really, for the few guys who are really truly on that it's a game side of things, it's a very different perspective, I think, because today, like people playing 5e, they think about it in terms of role playing. We're going to do funny voices, and I've played in games where they're like, can we not do any voices? And I've certainly,
you're talking about old school games, right?
Yeah.
And
I've heard it said that you don't need character names. Like, don't even bother. Don't name your characters.
Okay.
Like, that is a level of game. There is a level of gameism where you don't even bother naming your characters, and not because you think they're going to die, but just because it isn't. You actually genuinely don't care and don't consider it important because you're focused so much on the gaming and player skill aspect. James is here.
Okay, he said he'll be ready in a sec. I'll let him tell me whenever he's ready. Yeah, so yeah, that was actually my very first Dungeon Crawl Classics experience. Was it was the DM or the judge and his wife, and then it was me and one other player. And I'm over here, this being my first game that wasn't Dragon Age RPG or 5th edition, and we're told that we're playing in it was what was the one by Michael oh God, I can't remember his name. So the Chained Coffin DCC book. Some people might know what I'm talking about. Michael Curtis. And it was an Appalachian fantasy thing. So everybody's hillbillies, everybody's rednecks. So I'm over here doing my best redneck accent, getting into, even though I had 4 characters, right? Because it's a funnel. I had 4 characters and I'm over here doing an accent or whatever. And then the judge's wife just kind of rolls her eyes. She's like, "Oh, you're one of those." That was my first time when I felt actively discouraged from portraying a character's voice. It was funny. More than, it didn't bother me or anything. I was just like, "Oh, okay." So I guess I won't do that. I've heard of people saying that they don't want you to. I've never heard of anybody saying like, don't name the character because it doesn't matter. But I can kind of. I don't. Yeah. even
The idea would be that your character's a game piece on a game board.
Your character, yeah, right. Yeah, I can't do that. So not that I think that like you need to get super deep into trying to trying to portray your character in novel ways, and like having um big backgrounds and all that. I don't even think that as much. It's just that having some kind of distinction um is important, and having some idea of what they might think, or how they might make decisions.
That sounds like
Maybe
my guy
that's
syndrome.
huh
Now you're sounding like the my guy syndrome.
Well, yeah, I was just about to say, then that might be kind of toxic in that atmosphere, because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to do the smartest thing that a player can do. You're not like the character doesn't really exist as much as the game piece, as you were saying. So I don't know.
So, to offer a rebuttal to the idea that I've just proposed, I do think the game can get a little staid and boring if you're so focused on it as a game and you're just kicking down doors and you never add any spice or flavor to it with role playing or thinking about character goals that aren't necessarily perfectly optimal. I do think there's room to have character goals that are kind of silly and fun that don't directly hurt the like dungeon crawling gameplay. And this is something. I mean, it depends on the group and the players, but that's something that I do enjoy. I'm hesitating because all my examples are really weird. I literally can't say them out loud. The players have done some really bizarre stuff in the one game.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. And Upperlander puts it well. He says, I mean, at that point, is it really a role-playing game if the character is just unnamed game piece? Argue it's no longer a role-playing game.
It's not a role-playing game. It is a
like you're
fantasy
just playing
adventure game.
Yeah. Our favorite acronym.
Unfortunately.
Like you're just playing Munchkin with extra steps at that point.
Correct.
I agree. A lot of the charm of the role-playing game. Okay. So there is the extra steps there would be important, and that is the fact that you do have this this adventure game engine that is capable of producing results with unexpected variables added. So like you can come up with solutions that a board game or anything like that can't handle because it's not equipped to, but the human brain at a group of at a table with a bunch of people can figure it out. And I think there is value in that. But at the same time, when we think about what is a role-playing game, I do think that it's kind of lost at that point. I think that there may be an overreaction for some people. Like they're so sick of people injecting theatrics and things like that in their games that they just kind of don't want to deal with it at all anymore. And that's kind of like the reaction I had to characters never dying, is then I created a game where characters died, 4 PCs would die every session almost. But
Prince of Nothing and I were competing. I was kind of bullying him with my chart, my big table of characters who had died. So it had begun to feel like a competition for who could who would happen to have more characters dying. Not that I was killing any characters inappropriately.
They were all bad.
They all deserved it.
They all deserved it. It was all their own fault.
Well, so we have our good buddy Ash of Creativity, aka Gelatinous Rube, aka James Streisand, here with us. So now the talk on feats can officially begin. Looks like he's still waking up.
I woke up literally like a minute ago.
Or are we going to go through every feat one by one and decide if they are appropriately balanced?
Oh yes, and we're gonna go through a very in-depth analysis. It's gonna take probably about 6 hours. Hope everybody brought their coffee. No, we're not doing that shit.
Yeah,
but no, right now is just trying to kind of catch up on some comments. Zerbus says he's not gonna be able to join us, which is unfortunate because we'd love to have him. Plot armor comments are great. Let's see. What in the world? I think the problem is that I'm scrolling up instead of scrolling down.
There were it's going way back to a previous topic, but
Mhm.
Ye Old Geek was complaining about the idea that there was a DM shortage. I don't know if he specifically was thinking of 5e. His point was that there was an article, a New York an article about New York City specifically, which was claiming a DM shortage, and that the problem was basically made up, and that it really only applied in that specific setting. And I don't think that's true. The example I brought up about the official D&D Discord server having like a 600-to-1 ratio of people marked as DMs versus players is evidence of that. But then something for me personally, there's a few game stores in my area. They have their own Discords, and those Discords are constantly filled with people begging to play 5e. And there's
Mhm.
like one guy who DMs 5e in the area at the one store, and he has to tell people like, you can't. I have too many players. I can only have so many. So I do think it's true, at least for me in my area. I can provide the anecdote that in my area, the problem exists here too. This is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, wow. Which, that being a pretty.
Wisconsin, I don't necessarily. It has the advantage of it's far north, so it's cold, so people have a tendency to enjoy indoor hobbies. But
Mhm.
I don't think there's anything. Wisconsin being the birthplace of D&D has not amounted to anything special. I mean, we
Other
lost.
than the conventions, I guess.
We do actually have a lot of conventions. I
Yeah.
will say there's a lot of small conventions, even practically every month of the year. There's one or two. So you could go to conventions on a pretty continuous basis. A surprising number of them are through churches or groups.
Yeah, I know that the angry GM lives up there. A few people in the tabletop industry that.
Was he from Madison? I can't remember.
He was from Chicago originally.
Oh, maybe
They
that.
moved out to Milwaukee. I think about 4, maybe 6 years ago now.
I'm not sure. I bumped into him one year at Gen Con. Incidentally, the year he lost a bet or something and had to wear and decided to wear the Sailor Jupiter uniform.
No,
Despite being an adult man, which it's funny.
he's a
Makes it all
large
the more
man.
impressive.
He's a large man. That's an ill-fitting
that's
costume for a large man.
I don't know. I think that with the New York City and with the Discord thing, I mean, both of those are situations where you have just sheer massive numbers of people, and I think that I think it makes sense that the proportions would get way out of whack there. But as far as how things are here, I live in what I'd consider a kind of like a suburb, like small city kind of situation. And I mean, our in real life tabletop is as far as like gaming stores is just like dead. Like I never see people playing there before COVID hit. We would see like 5 games of D&D running at a time at the store, at the game store. Now 0. Every time I go there, there's nobody there. When it comes to the we have the same we have groups on like Facebook and things like that, like local groups for organizing. I hear people saying that they want to join a group and they may join an in progress group, but there's still not a whole lot of people that I see are actually running games. There's a lot of people that are wanting to, but I don't see a whole lot of it actually happening.
I think the majority of people who play 5e for the first time are going to either bounce off of it or bounce off of their group specifically. I was in the D&D server last night. I've been ingratiating myself in there to the folks inside, to the detriment of my mental health. And there's so many people. I was talking about my West Marches game, and the West Marches is primarily being flooded with players. I think there's one person who offered to maybe begin DMing once I get more comfortable with the group, which is fine. But the DM player ratio is I think we're starting to go a little bit above the Gygax recommendation of 1 referee to about 20 players. And the people, the reason I bring this up is I think there's a lot of people in there who, like, they read about the game, they read a rule book or two, or now read up character statistics on D&D Beyond, and then they maybe think about coming to a game. They might come to one, they might bounce off of it because their expectations are completely out of whack. Almost set by the online discourse completely. So if they come to a game and there's like orcs and kicking down doors and tactical combat, a little bit of tactical adventure gaming, if you will, they just bounce right off of it. So I think the number of people who are going to have like 3 sessions or less, but still be a part of the D&D community is massive, and it's skewed towards players.
Right. Yeah, it is.
I have a bunch of thoughts about that, but I have to step away for a minute since I've managed to empty this pitcher.
Yeah, mine's running low, but I'm gonna stick around. I'm just gonna dehydrate on camera for the benefit of those who hate me. Let's see.
I have headphones in, so I'm listening.
I got you. Helsente says, I want to live in a world where gamers are encouraged to take the rules and make them work for individual gaming tables. Ooh, I bet you have something to say about that, James.
Yes, I do.
Errant Dragon says, I like the idea of backgrounds. Ideally, it should be cut down to 10-page. It should cut down those 10-page backgrounds to a single choice on the character sheet. 10-page backgrounds. It's a single choice in the character sheet. I'd like to hear exactly, what you think about that, Errant Dragon. More detail. What were you going to say with regard to the
idea that more tables should be making that's how we got in this mess to begin with, is people being miserable. Lilith Starfall, wait a second, you're a recent subscriber. I recognize the name. We got into this mess by people modifying rules that they knew nothing about and had no capacity or proficiency in modifying or designing rules whatsoever, could not be trusted to make a simple game if they were offered millions of dollars and infinite time, changing rules that they did not understand at their table because it inconvenienced them. And they covered for themselves by saying, well, it's how my table does it. This is how my table should work. This is how this is simply better for a group, I believe. It's always a lie. It's always from people who have no idea what they're doing. It's more common now because people will. It's quite common for people who are told why a rule exists to now use that as a justification for their changing the rule. They're like, oh, well, I know why it was made. I passed the allegory of Chesterton's fence, so now I'm a true designer because I've read the explanation for why Gygax did something or did not do something.
Yeah, okay. So whenever you were saying, personally, I think that it is important for them to understand why things are a certain way. And I think that the game needs to have a strong identity for people to be able to extrapolate that. It either needs to be explicitly stated or you need to know what the game's about. And you really don't get that with 5e, in either direction. You don't really get the why, and you don't get the what exactly, as far as like what is the game. You just get these very generic terms about it being an adventure game, it being about fantasy stories and things like that. So I think that's one issue. I haven't really had any strong compunction against changing things for my group because I do think that it's necessary, but I wouldn't say that. I would say that there's a lot of evidence that shows that there are a lot of people that make changes they don't understand the ramifications of, and they don't really understand, what if it needed to be changed in the first place, as opposed to maybe they had their expectations wrong,
Or you have it in the other way, which I'm sure will loop us into discussion on the mechanics, where people will explain their reason for changing certain mechanics, and people will fire back at them. the reason why, for instance, something like concentration exists, or why the class system's feats progress in a certain way. People who do change things are hit by a barrage of WotC's explanation for why they included a given mechanic, and to them, this is total justification for why that mechanic is good, should remain in the game, and should not be modified in any way. But WotC's designers are not AD&D's designers. They're bad at their job. They fuck up all the time. They include band-aid solutions from weird and arcane sources for strange and stupid reasons having to do with legacy and player marketing and not the quality of the game.
I have
Well,
a surprising amount of respect for the 5e designers, which is odd, probably more than most people. I do agree that Gygax, his book is a cut above, like surprisingly good. Like the DMG, I honestly feel like it should be required reading for any game designer in anything. Like you're going to make video games, read the DMG of AD&D because there's a lot of stuff in there that is just broadly applicable to game design. It would be kind of interesting if they put that kind of thing in the DMG for for One D&D. I think they could.
For damn sure they're not going to. That would require too many people being told that that there's a good way and there's a bad way, and they cannot do that. That's what a lot of the discourse about the way that Wizards of the Coast has been handling things is that they want it to be a lifestyle rather than a specific game. So because of that, you can't be exclusive in any way.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd line to walk. There's this. It really is a bit odd how our cultural notions of what freedom and liberty mean have changed. They've gotten pretty bizarre to the point where people are very blatantly hurting themselves. And this sounds really silly in the context of D&D, but they're very blatantly changing rules in ways that hurt themselves. And yet apparently we're not allowed to tell them and help them that you're hurting yourselves. You shouldn't do that. It's very odd.
I mean, I'm very much a person of you do you, boo. As long as you're not hurting someone else, you're free to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
But as I'm sure that James would be happy to point out if he were here, there are a lot of DMs that hurt their players with their decisions. Things that they decide to make changes to, and then you have players that are like, well, this is the only game around. This is the game I'm in right now. This is where my friends are, that kind of thing. So.
I mean, that's the real problem. Somebody was screwing themselves over in solo play, which I think is probably the appropriate avenue for testing out different design materials. Is a more sophisticated solo play system. It would be fine, but they're leveraging their players' personal friendships and relationships into supporting a game which does not work.
Yeah.
With a lot of the stuff that James says, I usually agree, and but it's a matter of degree. So the idea that people are going to change stuff and they're going to do it wrong, especially people. There is a bizarre thing where people get into D&D and they realize they can change anything they want, and they think that because they can, they should and will, and they change things that they probably shouldn't. To some extent, I think this is natural, especially when you're first getting into it, to see what you can stretch. Definitely, I do think it's great advice for new people to tell them, don't do that. Just play the game for a while.
Yeah.
And then after you've played the game for a while, then try to change stuff. I think some of that happens just because, you buy the books, you try to schedule a session with your friends. It's okay. We finally figured out that 2 weeks from now we can play. Oh, well, I've got 2 weeks here. I'm to start fiddling with things. But your efforts, your energies would probably be better spent designing proper content. Right?
Yeah. Build the world, make some monsters, make some magic items.
Any of that. I was going to complain that there's no starter dungeon in the DMG, but actually they released the starter set. I think some of those, I don't remember if the PDFs were free. Probably
I think they did at some point make them available for free PDFs, but I don't know. I don't think it stuck. I think it was just like a short term thing. Yeah. Let's see what else we got.
No, just while you're finding out their stuff, I'd agree. Like, designing is fun. I've been a designer for 7 years. I like designing, and I think that people should be able to play like different games, and that does extend to what are effectively heavy modifications of other games. But the majority of people are just going to do it so badly, so miserably, and use it as like an right off the diving board. It's going to be their justification for playing something wrong, and that's generally my concern, where they're hurting themselves and their players. But other than that, outside of that context, yeah, design's fun, and playing things that you design is also fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
it is. It is. Yeah, there's yeah, I think there are a lot of players that suffer just out of the desire to engage in a social activity and just being just not wanting to rock the boat. You know, it's kind of like the bystander effect in a way. You know, you've got 5 other people that aren't complaining, and so you know, are you going to be the one who saves the day? You know, whenever those people could do it. I think that there's a little bit of psychology going on there. Here's a comment from Helsente. Would current 5e players ever understand how all characters could be made from slight alterations of only fighter, magic user, and hybrid cleric warlock? I mean,
Would they understand? Yeah, they understand, because characters used to have the complexity of a chainmail unit.
Well, but would 5e players
classes,
understand that? Would
yes.
5e players?
Characters used to have the complexity of a chainmail unit.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with a 5e player doesn't know what chainmail is?
But they understand that these character classes have about 4 lines apiece, or they might take up half a page or a page. And so something which is appears to be, at the very least, anemic, the more you delve into it, the more you discover, oh, well, this line hooks into this massive subsystem that affects how you're going to be playing for the rest of your campaign. But on first glance, like, the fighter covers what, like 2 or 3 paragraphs? So it's something like half a page.
You know, this is going to turn into a basic versus advanced argument that I'm going to end up making here, because I actually think this original premise is not true. The idea that the characters are simple and that they are just slight alterations of one another. The AD&D, for example, a character is not just the character. There are also all of the magic items that character is almost certainly going to end up getting.
Yes, absolutely. That's those subsystems I was talking about, where they hook into.
Yeah, the character, like what it is that in like a game like 5e, rather than being as heavily tied to specific events and magic items that are assumed to happen. I mean, in an AD&D game, for example, it's assumed that you're going to get items or wishes or whatever that eventually raise your attributes. In 5e, they just, every 4 levels or whatever, you bump your attributes.
Right.
So it's more tied into in a character building and character progression is more explicit and not as dependent on the DM to run the game correctly. The reason I'm smiling and laughing here is because I was expecting James to jump in there and be like, aha, yes, exactly, those darn DMs ruining the game.
No, in this case, it's on the hand of Casimir Urbanski, basically taking out one of the few methods of progression that players have, which is magic items.
Yeah. We're going to blame him for the 5e presumption that magic items are not they were not really truly designed into the game. They were
I don't think
just as an
I'd
afterthought.
I don't think I'd put
He-
that on his shoulders as far as 5e goes, but I
He
would
takes
as far
credit for it, so I am happy to lay the blame at his
Does he?
feet.
He does. It's true.
Stupid, effeminate, mind,
let's not
tobacco smoke addled.
We're not here to insult anyone.
we're not here to insult
That's
other
not
channels.
true. That's explicitly
This is-
not true.
This is a good channel, wholesome. Aaron the Pedantic does not necessarily endorse the opinions of guests.
No, so taking out, I would agree that taking out most of my design projects since, which I will not discuss, have been made with the idea that players should be acquiring rewards of some variety or another every session. And by taking the DM out of the equation, I will say, they have removed a lot of the variety and opportunity in the design to produce different kinds of rewards that might not involve magic items or might not involve leveling, but they've restricted it to class levels, which you get infrequently outside of the beginning spread of levels, where you're literally supposed to, as particular says, you're supposed to level more often than you sleep in those early levels of 5th edition.
I do
And
find that funny.
it's hysterical. So first fight, bang, there you go, level 2. And the and magic items again are people might go an entire campaign without seeing a magic item for their character specifically, and that's horrendous to me.
Yeah, I agree.
That is an interesting thought that you presented there. The idea that because they've tied everything to character leveling as the main and only source of gaining any benefits, now if you don't level up every session, that means at the end of a session you got nothing. It was a waste of time. Whereas in an old school game, you don't. I mean, yes, often maybe you just get some money, but you are. I mean, I would think that in a good game you're going to find at least one magic item per session.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't necessarily go to. It's not like every player gets a magic item, every character, but someone does, and there are other benefits that you talked about. The idea of meeting an NPC who could be helpful, potentially a benefit. Having favors owed to you by people that you've helped is a benefit. And 5e does, especially now with looking at the way One D&D is. I don't know. That seems to be an aspect of the game that they don't build on or don't do anything with.
They're further ignoring it. It's possible, theoretically, that the social subsystems and the exploration subsystems that they might be planning to build are completely and totally wholly disconnected from anything that is going to be in the player's handbook as far as classes are concerned. But at that point, my cynicism creeps in. I'm just going to say that they're not going to include a social system. They're not going to include reaction rules. In spite of reaction rules working, like reaction rules still work perfectly in 5th edition. I don't know, like it seems like a universal game mechanic.
What do you use? One of the skills, I forget which one. People typically roll as a reaction, basically.
Yeah. So they do have those. I didn't even know that those rules existed in 5e until I did a more in-depth reading of the DMG. It's just like I don't know, like a page maybe or something where it's like, oh, they have these levels of agreeableness, and like whenever you do this kind of check, and then you can increase it to the next one or whatever. I don't.
But it's all self-contained within that. It's all self-contained within that skill system. So you're just modifying the next skill roll that you're going to make against this person, and it's not outcome oriented. Like this Fomorian that we're going to press into service. I'm going to make a reaction roll. How is this going to work against him? And if it's based on a player skill, which can be, creeped up to get it something like a 30, I don't have that skill system is not reliable enough for even producing outcomes to begin with that we might expect them to.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying.
The numbers are fucked, is what I meant to say. The numbers are fucked.
Yeah. Which maybe that's something that they're fixing here. So one of the first things that that I noticed was they got rid of the was it, I don't know if it was alert or observe it. Which one gives you +5 to passive
Alert.
perception? Alert. That one,
wait, passive perception? Actually, that would be observant.
Observant,
Yes.
So with
Observance
that
is
one,
also passive investigation. It's the only reference in the game to it.
oh, okay. But either way, that was one of those ones that really fucks the numbers. Especially because we're dealing with a scale of 0 to 30, pretty much. And whenever you get expertise added onto it, it gets a little wild.
I never liked the idea of passive perception. This was one of those things where if there's a room description, you just read it to the players. And
Right.
if they're actively looking, then maybe they might have to make checks. But even then, I don't really like that either. I'd rather reward good questions with just actual answers without having to make a roll to see, did you get the good answer?
Like, how are you searching this bookshelf for the activation of a secret door? Well, I'm going to yank every single book off the shelf. Well, that might take some time, but if you get the trigger, which is the one book that doesn't come off, then it is guaranteed, basically by way of your character's descriptions, and sort of regardless of what a check might provide you with. That's a lot more, I think, more fun to engage with, broadly speaking.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that passive perception does that I feel like is an essential part of the game, and I'm not saying it's well done, is detection for hiding, pretty much. If somebody is trying to do some kind of, if your party is trying to sneak, which even this is not implemented well, in my opinion, then you have your stealth rolls versus the passive perception of the bad guys. Whereas, in the past, it was just a percentile based off of your class and level and maybe any race modifications you might have and maybe some circumstantial modifiers. And it's just a single roll. I'm going to go with the latter every time, because the former is just, it's kind of cumbersome. Are we going to all roll and everyone has to pass, or are we going to average it, and do it that way? It's just kind of tedious.
You
There's
don't know if the
specificity
game intends for one bad roll to ruin the party's stealth.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be reasonable. We could all think here as to why it would be reasonable to assume that one bad roll would ruin the party's stealth if one person's in play. I'm personally comfortable with that.
Yeah.
It's not made terribly explicit.
I love that's like the one mechanic of 5e. I think it is the best thing in 5e. Group stealth checks.
Group stealth.
Is that actually codified?
I believe that's correct. You can treat stealth as a group check where if half or more of the group passes, the group passes. I think that's good for the game. I think it's good if the group can, the way I justify it in my head, of course, is like, okay, the guy is, he sees the plate heavy guy is about to step on something and make a bunch of noise. That's like a classic movie scene too, right?
Right.
Where the stealthy guy puts his hand out and stops the guy just before he would alert the bat, do something that would alert everyone. I think that's good for the game if the group can actually use their stealth as a group, because otherwise you're going to split the party.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Here it is. Group checks.
I found myself swayed.
If at least half the group succeeds, the whole group succeeds.
Yeah, at that point, it's not a matter of one person stealthing poorly. It's a matter of do you have enough folks does your party composition counterbalance what would otherwise be failed stealth rolls?
Mm-hmm.
It's quite fun.
It's like a abbreviated skill challenge, kind of.
There's a mudcore commenter who needs to be shoved into a locker.
Oh boy, we got a mudcore. All right, let's see.
And it's not like you can't also say, if you do desperately need the better odds, where you want to do a scouting situation, you can still send off the one player, do a quick scout run, and he has better odds than the group as a whole. Yeah,
it doesn't ruin their particular niche. It just but it does expand their uses for stealth. One of which is saving the other party members from bad stealth. Yeah, I find myself swayed.
Now you're not saying that this was the Mudcore comment, are you?
After a session, no. Let's see here. After a session, you get XP. That's not nothing. It's nothing insofar as it does not change my gaming experience until I gain a level. And in 5th edition, there's quite a few dead levels which do not change my gameplay experience, especially depending on the class I'm playing. It's different in older games.
I don't know if he's talking about 5e. So that's one of the things. I feel like the play culture has kind of abandoned magic items in 5e because of all the things that you get that are tied to level and the fact that most people want to play milestone anyway. So that, people are just itching for the next level. They're not, the DMs aren't really having to think about, the characters getting new and exciting things so that the players have stuff to tinker with because it's built into the system.
Or it's built into the module, assumed milestones for leveling.
Yeah, I always forget that 5e has modules because I don't like them. I like Tomb of Annihilation, but I didn't know that it had. Oh yeah, it does have certain things where it's like, oh yeah, they should be progressing in level at this point or something. I don't know.
Right. I was actually talking about, what was it? Trapdoor Spider. Saying 3 sessions is too short for level 1, especially if you're trying to work new players through a lot of the mechanics. The average lack of intelligence of the average American is being overestimated here. If that set of phrases and contradictory words make sense to you, I apologize.
I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. People are not that dumb. People are not that stupid that they need to be eased into these mechanics over the course of 3 sessions, or else they can't possibly gain a level.
I don't know if I agree with y'all on that. I think I'm kind of with Spider on this because I have met a lot of players that really never quite caught up, and part of it is the level of investment that they as players have in the game.
If you think that 10 sessions at level 1 was going to teach those types of people the game?
I wouldn't say 10. I'm not thinking a particular numerical value because how long are your sessions? How much time during your sessions do you actually spend engaging with the game's mechanics versus, bullshitting and making Monty Python jokes? It's really hard to quantify like how much experience they're actually getting with the game that way. But I do think that, I have had 3 sessions pass before, and in that amount of time, players not really understand exactly what their characters are capable of at that point. Still, I think it's very possible, and it's not going to be the case with the people that are, thinking about the game outside of table time, or spending time reading the manuals and talking to people about how stuff works and all that. But, with the people that are really mostly there for a social engagement activity with a little bit of fantasy and, some interesting things happening because of the mechanics every now and then, those people are going to be behind. So
bad players don't turn into good players by hobbling good players out of their experience and fun.
Comparative respect. I actually do, surprisingly, I'm going to agree with Spider just to a good extent here. Think about the difference between somebody playing D&D in 1974 and the 5e character. In the original game, in the truly original game, you don't even have all the dice yet. You only have a D6 and maybe a D20. And you might only have D6s. And then what can your character do? You can attack. You can do the kinds of tactics you would expect from a war game. Now, in 5e, your fighter has... I forget which is which. He has
action surge. Well, yeah. Well, first you have a second wind, and then you get action surge later. And
is that level 2? I know second wind.
Level 2 is level 2 is action surge.
Already you have a resource to track. You have look at the 5e character sheet compared to say a basic character sheet. I mean, even making a character is a pain with new players. The whole thing where you're going to try to explain to them, okay, here's all the skills. Here's what the sheet means. I do think, to some extent, if people are like gamers, like they play video games, that'll give them a huge leg up. I have had players who can't tell what dice they need to roll after like 6 months They still don't know what dice they're rolling. I do think at that point that type of player is a lost cause. You're either you like them enough that you're going to keep helping them, or you cut them. But
take them out behind the woodshed, make sure that they don't hurt anybody else.
I do think 5e. There's been comments made that 5e is considered an easy game because 3rd edition exists and 4th edition exists. 5e is insanely complicated, unbelievably complicated compared to like simpler older RPGs from like this.
Yeah, compared to BX, but like I Am Godzilla to a 5-pound weight. If you compare this to like other video games that exist,
it's so much higher than the amount of onus put on a player for an older game. I mean, in an older game, it is much more reasonable to expect the DM to know everything and potentially even track everything. The characters, I mean, Arneson
Prince tracks my encumbrance. Prince of Nothing tracks my encumbrance in the BX game. Yeah, I'll agree with that.
I mean, Arneson infamously didn't show his characters didn't have character sheets. He just tracked everything behind the screen. Imagine doing that for a 5e character.
Good God!
Imagine the DM controlling everyone's character sheets. Like that's impossible.
That's why I abbreviated hirelings, because I'm not doing that shit for them.
I really think the idea that 5e is easy or that it's training wheels is lacks perspective. It makes, if you've played RPGs for 20 years, if you've played 3rd edition, yes, 5e is easier than those games. But for someone totally new, especially for someone who doesn't play a lot of video games, it is incredibly overwhelming, 5e. I mean, yes, again, people could go watch YouTube videos. Sorry, I'm like directly replying to Aaron Dragon at this point. You could go watch YouTube videos. That's true. Is that level of investment reasonable to expect from everyone at your table? I often play games with people who are they're just friends. You know, they're not gamers. They literally are, believe it or not, you can have a 30-year-old adult male who doesn't play video games and get them at the D&D table. I've done that, and it's rough. I mean, you definitely want to ease them into it. So we have intentionally stayed at level 1 to get the group at more comfortable with the game before moving on. And I actually don't think you need to stay at level 1. I actually think it might be better to get to level 2. But then level 3 is a big jump because you get like the subclasses.
That's when most of the subclasses
earlier,
come in,
but a lot of them are at level 3. Second level spells show up at level 3. And it might depend on the group too, where if your more experienced players are playing the Magic User or whatever, then it's not as big of a deal to jump to 3. But honestly, even if of course, we gave the guy a fighter on purpose. The guy who is not a gamer. We'll give you a fighter. We'll put you in the champion background, I think, or not background, the subclass. I'm sure James will be like, "Oh, you gave him the weak one."
No, it's one of the strongest, and it's boring to my mind. But that's because there's no choices in the subclass. For a new player, I think it's perfect for just go hit this stuff, and you will hit the stuff harder. It's perfectly fine for that purpose.
I like the champion.
This has been a topic. It is so bizarre. The idea we tend to treat D&D. Well, for one thing, we use it as a brand name to mean like tabletop games in general, and the amount of different ways to play. It's almost. I look at it comparing video games. Imagine if we refused to. Imagine if you booted up a game and you didn't know what video game you were going to get. It could be literally anything. That's what it feels like a lot of the time at a D&D table. You're like, somebody advertised a game. I'm going to go to the meetup.com group and play. And then you don't know what you're going to get because everybody runs the game differently. The experience levels of the players are so different. The expectations are so different. I'm afraid now because I feel like I'm making an argument for session zeros, which I'm definitely not doing.
No, they should just all agree to play the right way to begin with.
But what is the right way, James?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Let's so here's a comment just to follow up Errant Dragon about the backgrounds. He said he used to be one of those players who would write up to 5 to 10 page backgrounds, and if 5e did one thing good, it got him to quit doing that with background choice and character creation. Well, that's good. That's good. I feel I like the background system in 5e. I actually think I don't know that I agree with how everything is executed in it, but I think that it's solid. It gives you here's something that your character might have been doing in the past, and it's good to have something that they can just click, just be like, I'm gonna do that one, and then there's a little benefit, and the benefits are kind of hit or miss as to whether or not they are worth a damn. I feel like in a lot of groups they either don't matter at all or they matter way too much. When it comes to like Acolyte, for instance, being able to get a place to sleep with somebody who shares your religion, it's something, but it's not something that's going to come up terribly often, I feel like. And it really, gold is plentiful enough that it's not really going to be a huge deal.
Where it did come up?
Where's that?
In Shoma's Valley, which I've been running, which is quite fun. I've been siphoning players off the main D&D server, which is giving me more insight as to how some of these inexperienced players are working with the game. But in a game with more downtime actions or with more downtime activities, those background features are like perfect mechanical and narrative hooks. I think one person had the bounty hunter background in my campaign, and they said, hey, can I use this as a justification for learning this research activity in downtime? I want to get this information, because it's required for players in the West Marches or in the Brownstein to have some self-direction in order to go find quests and thereby find loot and magic items. And those features are designed as if they were meant to be hooked into a real subsystem that made use of them. I don't know whether that was by accident or not, but I thought it was interesting enough to comment on.
Mm-hmm. Here's a comment from my old friend from the 2E game I played in, Florence Lupon. I find myself using the 5-room dungeon, or at least the very first floor dungeons, more often than making large sprawling dungeons. Have any book suggestions to read to improve that? So we've already mentioned, well, I don't know.
The previous conversation, my answer has to be make them a slightly bigger, 10 to 13 rooms.
Well, but he's saying book suggestions. So I'll just tell you what got me to where I'm at with them. And that is, I think that the first larger dungeon that I read intensively was Death Frost Doom. And, it's probably not the best one to choose just because of it's rather notorious. But the reason that it stuck for me is because I was able to see how, how you can kind of like weave things together throughout several rooms with lots of things that you can observe and study and interact with and all that. And then you can kind of like get a stronger sense. It's kind of like environmental storytelling, like you get with Dark Souls and things like that. But you just don't get with a very short dungeon. And then so going from there, I started reading Dungeon Crawl Classics modules, things like People of the Pit, the Sailors on the Starless Sea, where you do have pretty expertly crafted, dungeons for people to go through that involve many, many, many rooms. They have lots of puzzles. They have lots of situations where you can be overrun by sheer quantity of bad guys. You have lots of magic items that people will maybe not find, certain ones that they will definitely find. And, just all these things kind of like feed into each other and kind of like have kind of given me what I look to do whenever I'm designing larger dungeons. Castles in Tillin, I'm reading through right now. And I love it. It's again, that one's. Does that fall under Mega Dungeon? I don't know.
Zintillin, I think it's referred to when people talk about Mega Dungeons. Zintillin would be one of them.
Yeah. I think it falls under there. And again, it's just like you just get to see how much personality a place has, and there's just more that they can get from it. I think that just like seeing more design, it helps. And then just having a more than reading any books, just have like a specific identity that you have in mind for and a tone in mind for what you think the dungeons should be, and then go from there, like filling in the blanks. And that's how I've built my larger dungeons. I feel like most of my dungeons are at least 25 rooms minimum, with very rare, like, unless it's like, oh, it's a beast layer or something, then it's like, you got to.
Yeah, my 10 to 13 number is specifically for a very punchy one shot where you may have the same characters show up week to week, but you want to do something. You want to keep your sessions contained into a 2-hour time frame. If I'm writing a dungeon, like a proper dungeon, my minimum number of rooms for a floor, I think, is like 40. You need, in my mind, it gets tough to strain the players without having opportunities for them to get trapped inside the dungeon and have to navigate a lot of space to get out. They slide down a chute, they get teleported, whatever. That's one of like the classic ways you strain the players' resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the way that you can play with space in a like a larger dungeon that you really can't in a smaller dungeon. The whole concept that we needed to create a way in which you have a character race that can detect sloping passages becomes relevant only whenever you have large dungeons. Because the whole point is that you can make use of changes in elevation so that they lose track of the fact that they've changed dungeon levels. Now they're on a different level of the dungeon, but they're still using the same level of their map because they don't know the difference. And now they're all confused. Like, what the fuck? There wasn't an opening there before. Is this place changing? There's just a lot that you can do there. I mean, on one of my dungeons I made, like, I had enough rooms that they were able to tell, okay, this place is built in a way that is very symmetrical. And this side over here has a spot that's different. So there should be an opening here. You should be able to tell that. Oh, because of how this spot rests on this floor, there should be something here for and they're able to find secret passages just by looking at their maps and making deducing things. But those were fantastic players with a lot of experience. So I'm not saying that's like common, I'm sure. So I'm being told by very important people that I need to drink. So I'm going to get some water while y'all two talk. But I feel like we could talk about feats in a minute if y'all are up to it.
I'll be happy to talk about feats.
What were you saying?
That's a joke. I said I've got 2 of them.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, y'all go ahead and start talking about it. I'll be right back.
All right, now that Aaron's gone, we can talk about whatever we want.
Yes, back to Casimir Urbanski, and he's
No, actually, on streams and such like this, I default back into my streaming mindset of there's no cursing, there's no insults. You talk about the work only. You can bash the work. Gosh, and
boy, are we going to.
We started talking about One D&D originally, and I did not look at any of these documents until just last night. So I wanted, since you didn't hear any of this, I'm going to tell you this now. My biggest takeaways at a broad level, the idea that capstones got moved to 18th level, so funny to me. And the idea of feats and backgrounds giving the things they give, it really looks to me like they're pushing character building even more than they're giving up on pretending it's not a character building game, and they're just saying, okay, fine, it's a character building game. Because like the 18th level thing, that means you're multi-classing. I mean, everyone multi-classes at that point.
Right, everyone multi-classes. It also kind of means they're recognizing that their level spread is massive for the amount of abilities that they actually have the intellectual capacity to generate. I've actually swung in the other direction, mostly on account of the ranger and the changes that they made to the hunter subclass in particular, because they removed the Hunter Ranger in 5th edition used to have at each subclass level would have a few different options for you to take. Now, as it was described by Jeremy Crawford, which I recently did a video on, they took the subclass levels, the choices that you would make at the subclass levels of the Hunter, and just reduced it to the one that they thought was most popular according to feedback. So they're removing most of the choices that you're going to be making in the context of your character, with the exception of these feats. But they're leaning, I would say they're leaning even more heavily into the beginning character building of your character. Like the character building that you do at the start, like the ideal 60 hours that you spend building your character, because it will not be changing across the course of the next 1 to 8 levels or the next year, is even more critical.
You dug into this more detail than I did. I kind of skimmed over at a broad high level.
Right, but like that, so I'm agreed that at the very least in the beginning, they're putting way more of an emphasis in character building, because they're stripping it out of the level progression.
That's sort of odd. I guess that
it's kind of counterintuitive to what either of us would do, right?
That is giving into character building, but like in an insanely degenerate way, where character building exists at first. Like, character building exists to not play the game. Like, it's something you make characters for characters that will never be played, because none of the decisions occur at higher levels. I mean, I guess maybe you decide, no, even then, because you're just going to multi-class at the beginning. It's very odd.
Right.
Having no decisions to make later means that it's like a fake character building thing, where you basically make characters to make characters that are not going to be really played.
Yeah. Or character building is a mode of play unto itself.
Correct. Yeah.
And then there is the adventure. And these two things have never the two shall meet.
Yeah. I don't know. This is playtest, so maybe they have more planned later on, but we'll see.
Well, let's see. Is this the same amount of feats you used to get?
Sorry, what's
the?
I think it's more. You get well, there's one more.
You get the first level one, yeah.
You get the first level one, yeah.
But it looks like it's still every 4th level almost. You have an option for
19th level is a feat.
Yeah, 19th is you get one a little bit early. But I don't know. So what was the consensus on feats? Good or bad?
No, we didn't even get to that.
Y'all didn't get to that?
No. I like the concept of floating class features, or floating features which are meant to get added to a character. They're basically, the effects of certain magic items just coming to you as a result of training or practice. I'm fine with, but that is not a blanket endorsement of any and all feats. There are better and worse ways of designing these things.
I should go look at my post 5e game, which did get some amount of time spent on it. But what I did to see if I had feats or had like these types of character customizations at higher levels. I do think feats in general, like having at least one feat at first level, is good. I like that.
Just let people jump into it. Like, that's how they make their niche nowadays, I guess, is through the feats.
All right.
My mind is...
go ahead.
Oh, we've been talking for 2 hours, and now I'm getting crazy. 5e should just go all in. Like, D&D, corporate D&D should go all in on it's a superhero game. And just the character building should look more like Mutants and Masterminds or whatever.
Yes, fantasy superheroes. I mean, I feel like 13th Age seems to do it pretty well. You know, that's my opinion just from looking at it without actually playing it. But yeah, let's look at these feats. So first off, you have specific level requirements for feats, it looks like. Because we have 4th level. Whereas we had in the origins document, we had 1st level feats, it looked like.
Yeah, the whole class levels amount of levels required for feats isn't interesting from a design perspective. It's previously they wanted the simplicity where you couldn't make a mistake. Now it adds another design constraint where you can make feats that people couldn't get too early or whatever, but now players have to be careful, or the DM has to be careful and make sure, hey, wait a minute, you took that feat at 1st level, but it requires 4th level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's harder to use, but it adds another design constraint they can rely on.
Yeah, I'm curious about how they're handling this, because so if they divided feats in such a way that you really could only get so many of these kinds of feats and so many of of these kinds, you know, so that the character building, you know, doesn't I don't know, implode. You know, because you have too many of this kind or too many of that kind. I think that would be interesting. I don't know, like maybe the severity of how much they change what your character's capable of, if it like decreased over time or increased over time. You know, I think that would be interesting. But I don't know if they're saying like you can choose this at 1st level, and any time you get feats thereafter.
Oh, I think that would be what I would assume is it's a minimum level required to take the feat, and you can take it thereafter at any time you would gain a feat. It's only a matter of time. We should really put a countdown clock until they end up reinventing feat paths from like 30.
That's kind of what I'm feeling.
They floated it. Hold on, they floated it in a recent Unearthed Arcana before 1D&D D&D 1 actually came out. I don't know what the results of that survey were, but gosh, feat paths would be really weird in a game where you only had, I guess, 5 feats across the entire lifespan, the entire potential lifespan of a character, much less it's far more likely lifespan of 1 to 8 levels, or perhaps even fewer in D&D 1. This is so yeah, they're floating it. It seems completely insane to me that you would ever do that in a game with players that are only going to collect 3.
I mean, at that point, you're giving up you're saying, okay, I'm going to give up all my feats, and now I'm going to get a 2nd subclass, essentially, is what it acts like.
Yes. Because that was their purpose in 3rd edition, was literally, I feel like your feat structure was more rigidly defined than your class structure. Like you were not going to get fucking spring attack unless you got or whatever it was, or whirlwind strike, whatever the fuck it was, unless you took this feat, this feat, this feat, this feat, this feat. And it heavily mimicked a class structure such that you couldn't dip out of these different feats like you were dipping out of your classes in the 3 or 4 different classes to get certain abilities and combinations of skills. It's insane. So here we got charger, charge attacks, which should be a part of basic character actions for marshals. I'm glad to see that they have abstracted this to a feat that nobody will want.
I got charger in the past, but that's because I've never been a min-maxer. I kind of like would do things that I think sounded okay. I said never been a min-maxer. That's not entirely true. When I very first my second character was kind of a min-max thing. Yeah, a lot of these are 4th. I was seeing if they had any like 8th level feats, 12th, 16th, 19th, that kind of thing, because then I would think that maybe they are like trying to differentiate those things. Because like, for instance, let's say that they wanted to limit how many fighting styles that you could get outside of your character class, then maybe making it so that that's only a such and such level feat fighting styles are. Then that would be a way for them to gate that. Really, when it comes to feats, the ones that I hate the most are because they've actually toned down a lot of them.
They got rid of okay. Here's
Go ahead.
something that the site that they went through. I just absolutely removed this from the game. Anything that would produce a effect proc, where you would do something and then you would have an effect on your character sheet which procced off that effect, and then you would have a second effect proccing off of that. So, for instance, combinations with Sentinel and Polearm Master have been
what procced means for people who probably don't know.
Yeah, produce random occurrence.
That's
basic,
like a backronym or whatever. Like proc would just be the word procedure, a procedure that runs when something happens. So an event basically, like, or some effect takes place.
Right. So if I hit somebody with Polearm Master, and I happen to have the Sentinel feat, then I might. Sorry, if I have the Sentinel feat, I can hit somebody.
The event is when you hit someone.
Yeah.
Their movement is reduced to 0.
But with Polearm Master, I can make an additional opportunity attack, and that's on opportunity attacks. But with Polearm Master, I could do an opportunity attack when somebody comes within 10 feet of me. So if I have both these feats, I can hit somebody as they're approaching me if I have a polearm in hand, and I can reduce their movement speed to 0. And so there's the effect, which is the attack of opportunity, and then 2 things proc off of that.
And they changed something so that kind of interaction wouldn't be possible?
It looks like it's still possible.
Let's see here. Ostensibly, I don't know if this is updated. So if I go to...
If you look at reactive strike, you can use your reaction to make 1 melee attack against a creature that enters your reach when that you have with that weapon, and then Sentinel, when you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, that creature's turn speed.
But do you notice that the reactive strike? This is so. I hate these people so much. I hate these people so much. My enemies are ontologically evil, and there's no act against them which is impermissible. It's not technically
it is
an opportunity attack.
Of an opportunity attack, but like the text copy pasted so that it doesn't use the specific terminology.
Use the specific word opportunity attack.
Oh God, that's cancer.
And it was for specifically that interaction. They didn't really change the mechanic. They just told you no.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious if they're, it'd be kind of funny for them to already have a sage advice for the new stuff, but I'm curious if they've said anything with regard to that being, the ruling, as it were. Because to me, if you're using your resource, your reaction in order to do something, then it's okay if you double up on things like that.
It was not some horrific accident of intent in the game design that somebody were to do something that had to do with character building that also produced some interesting fun in the context of their boring slog combats for a year thereafter. Right? It was not horrifically overpowered, but it was sort of unique at the time, especially in the base player's handbook, that somebody would be able to generate a combination of effects on their one character sheet. This was abnormal in the rest of 5th edition's design. You're not going to be able to overlay most duration spell effects, for instance, on account of the concentration tag. So Marshall's having access to this was abnormal. It was strange, and I think a lot of people got a little bit jealous at it. And WotC looked at that and said, "Oh, well, if people are having fun with this, either we can create a bunch of these combinations and go more in the 4th edition direction, or we could go more in the BX direction and say, no, none of this is possible any longer. You're not supposed to generate any combination of effects based on one singular character. You may only do this by accident, by acting in tandem with your party members."
Mm-hmm.
I am sympathetic to the idea that these types of interactions are the whole character building thing where you don't know enough to build your character correctly, so you end up building it wrong, and then you find out later that you've wasted your life, and then okay, what happens now? Ideally, in AD&D, for example, you'd have wishes. Like the group would come across wishes to undo their mistakes. Now, character building, of course, wouldn't probably be one of those mistakes, but that's certainly the type of mechanic that I think would make sense in this type of game to undo your character building mistakes and change them out by expending a rare resource, as opposed to the problem is if there's no recourse, you're just going to beg the DM, and the DM is going to give in eventually but then the game, it's just so boring at that point because usually there's only like one option that's correct. I don't know. It's just this weird race to the bottom in terms of character building. I struggle with character building. Well, this is something that Aaron and I were talking about earlier. At least I was heavily pushing the idea that it's better if character building is less, if it has more trade-offs in the process where you don't get to pick every little feature by itself. You have to take bundles of things together so that you can't necessarily just get everything you want. That way there would be no situation where you chose wrong, because you're like, well, maybe I can't do that, but at least I can do this, as opposed to the situation you get in 5e and OD&D, I think, where it's just, or not OD&D. Oh no, they're infecting me. I said OD&D, and I was thinking 1D&D.
Oh God.
Oh no.
That's we're in dire straits at this point then. Spider says a thing I would look for is to see how feats can blur the line between classes, and that's one thing I've been wanting to pay attention to quite a bit. Okay, so you have I
will say this. I am happy that they take one good change that they made is taking it out of its description of optional, because it was not constructed as an optional rule. It was very obviously constructed as a core resource for players to have a smidgen of character customization or advancement across their levels that did not involve bumping a number up. Especially for those players who might have already had that number bumped up to whatever they might regard as optimal. And you could slightly change your character into having a new experience. And some people would look at the optional tag and say, oh, well, that's just optional. It's like, no, this is obviously a core to the game as it's played. So I'm happy that they just removed all ambiguity and removed that very dumb shield that people would hide behind. Like, oh, well, it says it's optional. This shitty game that we're playing, I'm dangling this one smidgen of relief in front of you, but it's optional.
Yeah, to me that's it's pretty. We're in pretty dire straits at that point with that as well. You know, considering now that it's like, okay, you're going to deal with feats, like that's part of the core design. So if you don't want feats, then this is not the edition for you. It is something. It is something, because there was a period of time where I just did not want to deal with feats at all. Part of that was because of how they interacted with things, and you know, just that I didn't like the way that a lot of the feats were put together. And I feel like they've improved a lot of them, in my opinion, which I don't know, maybe a step back in your shoes. That's part of the reason why I think it'd be an interesting topic. But as far as like how they seem to affect the classes, the fighting styles are restricted to the warrior group. And I think that that's important, you know, so you have to belong to, a group that would already be getting a fighting style of some kind in order to take a feat to get a different type of fighting style. So I'm glad that they did that. It may be blasphemy, but I'm glad that they did that. Let's see. Then you have like Great Weapon Master. That one's not class restricted. It's just you just have to have proficiency with a martial weapon, which you can get that from another feat, I'm pretty sure.
Right. That's pretty important for Rangers to be able to have access to it.
Well, Great Weapon?
Great Weapon, and I'm assuming Sharpshooter is in a similar boat, as I recall.
Yeah, let's look.
Sentinel, Sharpshooter. Yeah, proficiency with any martial weapon.
All right.
Yeah, they made them pretty disappointing. The promise that was given was that when it came to the warrior group, you were going to have special things to do with specific weapons. I think Jeremy pitched it as weapon-specific maneuvers, which is a certainly fun design space. But unfortunately, that means that certain classes, which are otherwise pretty heavily martial, like the rogue and like the ranger, are not going to have access to these, and their one, again, their pittance of character customization has now been removed from them, because now Great Weapon Master is not like this auto take for combat, and Sharpshooter is not this auto take for combat. Mm-hmm. Instead of, they just take this continual race to the bottom approach where they say, oh, well, these two options are performing at a level such that everybody thinks that it should be the baseline. So we're going to remove those options, or we're going to drag them down like crabs in a bucket. We're going to make sure that Sharpshooter is on par with the actor feat, because how else can our game, how we couldn't possibly bear the responsibility or burden of making any other interesting combat feats. I don't think they've added any new ones.
There's nothing inherently wrong in terms of balance, whether you're going up or down, whether it's nerfs or buffs. It really does play to the situation. I do think if they were buffing every feat to look like Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, that would constrain the design in an unpleasant way. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. The thing is, you'd have to sit down and try to design such a game and see what happens.
Right.
I mean, all they did was they took out the risk reward factor, which, I mean,
but that was one of the biggest points of those feats, was that like now the reward is
the trade-off between to hit and damage is not real. Like it's like you could just, if you had a spreadsheet with the math in front of you, there is one correct answer depending on the enemy.
Right. It's mechanically knowable. Yes. Especially based on you could get around that with different monster design. Like if they have more reaction, if the monsters themselves have more reactions or traits that triggered or procced off players making attacks on them. So it could be possible that this monster has a reaction that's going to increase the armor class, and maybe they use it against you specifically. But they don't. So that's correct.
I feel like that's this whole feat conversation is I practically wouldn't talk, because in my mind, all that's gonna happen is the moment the game is out, everyone does the work, sits there online and brainstorms what will the best combinations be, and a week later, it's a solved problem.
Everybody knows what to take.
Yeah. And then you just go online and look up the correct build. It's the same thing that happens in computer RPGs. It's the same thing that happens with net decking and card games.
Yeah, I don't... Oh, go ahead.
Just the idea that because you have such freedom to choose anything, everything is going to end up assigned like a point. I'm actually surprised people don't do this for 5e. You do have the rankings where you'll go and see, and someone's ranked every feat from like 5 to 1. Or they'll
use the color system on Giant in the Playground.
But you could do a point system and just say this feat is worth 76 points, character points, and this feat is worth 20 character points. And I'm not talking about like as a designer. I'm talking about as players deciding what options are the best. And then it turns out that the best characters add up to about 900 character points, and the worst. But it's also possible to make a crummy character that's worth 100. I don't know. I hate that.
It's funny you mentioned that. When I went through the Level Up playtest, the Level Up 5e playtest documents with Mildra, I actually started doing that. I said, all right, here's my little character matrix that I'm evaluating these different maneuvers on. And I started going through and I said, all right, well, this is how I evaluate this. This is how I evaluate this. If it doesn't balance out to 0, it's either really good or it's really fucking bad. And yeah,
this is why at first when I saw the backgrounds, I thought the backgrounds at first, at a glance, I thought, oh, this is really cool because they've put everything together into a package that you'll have to choose one of the packages and there's trade-offs. But then I noticed that at the beginning, it just says take whatever you want in any combination you want, which means that taking any of the prefab packages is always the wrong choice. You have chosen wrong if you take one of the prefabs. Because there's no way that a customized package wouldn't give you, I mean, unless
some edge or something more.
Unless they accidentally make one of the prefabs happen to work for some specific class.
Yeah, then it might actually be good. Right. And no, in tabletop RPGs, you can get more. I mean, we've had this discussion over certain spells, especially some that I've redesigned, where the idea is that this poses as a solution to a given problem, and it's sort of on you to make the solution to that problem work. Like you have a hammer, and so you must find a nail. And that's certain. There's more room for hammers for which you must simply find a nail in tabletop RPGs. But that doesn't mean that every possible, and this is where I split from the designers, that doesn't mean that everything that you put in the game actually constitutes a solution to a problem. So while they have more wiggle room in that regard than you might have in something like a computer RPG, the designers still fail on this front.
This is why I want the superhero build system where you literally have a point value. Those points we just talked about, imagine if those points were real and feats really did have point values assigned to them. And you had to build a character that was, just you got just enough points to feel starved, where you had to make tough decisions. And suddenly Zerbis talks about the 1,000 possible builds, 15 of them are good. Suddenly you could get closer, maybe not the 1,000 number, but you could get to 500. Suddenly 500 out of 1,000 are interesting.
It's 500 less opportunities for people to have a terrible game.
Especially if you're going to
feel like it was self-inflicted.
If you're going to lean into the whole D&D Beyond character building online, now you can automate it.
Right.
Just make it impossible to build a character out of the book. just make it so you have to use the online tool because it's too complicated and it would be a pain to make it by hand. Just let the tool calculate everything.
Right.
I don't know. We're getting into like total crazy hypotheticals. This is what happened. But I said we went over the 2-hour mark. I'm deciding that means I'm allowed to be crazy.
I think that's fair. Back to the question of how much they, they go over into class features. So I've never really liked Ritual Caster. This is what maybe if there was a prerequisite for spell casting, because they have that in some of the other ones, then I would appreciate it, because then it would be where you could, if you're well, no, actually, I don't even think that I would like that still. I just don't like the idea of a character, like let's say I'm a fighter, but I decided to study magic a little bit, that now I've got, these ritual spells that I can do whenever. How many is it? 2 of them. And you can pick it from any list. I mean, being able to ritual cast divine spells, even though you're not a cleric or a druid, is fucking weird to me. It's like, it just kind of dilutes what that's supposed to be. Well, actually, no, divine specifically cleric or paladin, because now we have primal for like druid stuff. Druid and ranger.
I don't think the idea that no, I prefer this. Like, maybe it denigrates people's impression that every single follower of the gods is a cleric in some way, or either fits into the cleric or paladin archetypes. But the idea that people might be able to perform some ritualistic magic, making an offering and beseeching a deity for a minor temporary benefit. I think it doesn't interrupt my impression of the game's implied settings at all.
All right. I mean, so it's not. I don't know that it's that. It's just class niche. So, I mean, looking at because they can choose.
Now we come to it. It is a mechanical issue, not a narrative issue.
Right. Yeah, there is that. For looking at what rituals they could choose, we've got comprehend language, we've got detect magic, find familiar. So I mean, theoretically, anybody could have a familiar.
Mm-hmm.
That was in my mind, the main use case of the feat previously was to get the familiar and get helped on everything.
Yes.
I always did it for like detect magic and identify. But that's
I know
because I used a
alarm
lot
used to be one. I don't know if it still is.
It is.
Okay.
Alarm. Let's see. Floating disk, which it's really not a big deal. Illusory script, not a big deal, really. Unseen servant. Okay, then we have to go into the other spell list to see. So divine, we got divine. Detect poison and disease. Purify food and drink. I'm not too, augury is level 1. So really it's not a whole lot from that one so far.
I thought in the other ritual caster, I'm actually a little bit disappointed. In the other ritual caster, I believe you could take any ritual spell that you came across, provided you basically got a ritual version of a spell book that you would be able to begin adopting. It turned you into basically this feat turned you into a shamanistic caster. Whereas prior you might not have any spellcasting ability. I certainly found that interesting.
The whole class niche thing. Sorry, this has triggered a thought in my brain on something we've seen this before. There's a place for this.
Do you want to discuss the clash niche thing?
Sure.
Yeah.
Aaron and I talked about it a little bit before, but you know what this is? Well, okay, to discuss the clash niche thing, the previously, in my mind, you'd have bigger groups of players. So like AD&D has all these classes, and you'd love to have each of them. And with a big enough group, you can. You have the ranger bringing surprise. You have the paladin bringing protection from evil, aura. You have the base classes bringing cleric spells, magic user spells, thieving skills, the ability to hit things really good as a fighter. And eventually in 5e now, you have all those roles being taken up where you take a little feat, you take a subclass, and now all of a sudden these roles are held by fewer characters overall. And my argument is that this just is because there's fewer players at the table. There's only 3 players a lot of the time. And you know what this reminds me of? World of Warcraft, which had in the classic game, they had 10 classes and they had 40-man raids, and everyone would fill their particular role. When in the next expansion, they bumped it down to 25 people in raids, and then in the next expansion, they bumped it down to 10 people in raids. You could still do 25s, but they did have 10s also. And over time, they did the exact same stuff that D&D is doing, where they took the character abilities that used to be unique to one class and kind of spread them around. So it reduced the number of roles from 10 to 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. And then eventually it got to the point where everyone could do everything. So we actually saw a very specific case where there was actually a fine balance point in the middle between giving everyone everything and requiring tons of people. And I really do think it's driven by how many players you expect to have at the table. And James, you missed this, but I think Aaron and I, we also talked about solving that problem with sidekicks or henchmen rather than spreading character abilities around. But I personally feel like the sidekick system did not become the big thing that everyone loved. So that says something to me.
Right. Well, they designed it as well, I'd say this about the side. Okay, the sidekicks would not have been the first time that WotC developed an Unearthed Arcana, which was designed to be dead on arrival. They did this with prestige classes and the Rune Scribe by very intentionally putting front and center the one complaint that was universal to all people who hated prestige classes in earlier editions. They've done this with a few others, but when it came to sidekicks, they basically functioned exactly like player characters, except they had more generic abilities according to the themes of expert, warrior, mage. I don't even think that somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I did recently look this up, but they had an identical spell progression between them.
Yeah.
A spell slot progression.
Yeah.
So
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, they did not design henchmen really for 5th edition. They just said, all right, well, we're going to design a generic player character from one of these 3 themes, and then we're going to slap the word sidekick on it. But really, it was just another player character that you would be less interested in enjoying, would potentially soak up some experience, depending on how your DM reacted to it. And wouldn't provide you, would just serve to further slow down the combat because it works exactly like a player character, and 5th edition combat is naturally slow. So there's still room for henchmen in 5th edition in terms of like what they want. But I think they more serve out of combat roles. Sorry, I'm going to phrase this differently. The more I've expanded the non-combat modes of play in 5th edition, the greater the player's interest in henchmen has been historically. So if I introduce crafting, they're more comfortable having like an artificer or an apprentice of some sort back at the keep, hammering away at a new magic item. If I have an exploration system, they're comfortable bringing a fisherman or something like that along. And the more I abstract their benefits, or the easier I make it to apply their benefits, like if a bodyguard isn't even placed as a figure on the board, but they just have, okay, well, this person's going to jump it, get down, Mr. President. If you take a particularly hefty hit, then players are more in favor of it. It's just that as they've been historically, as they try to jam an older style of henchmen into this legacy product, people get more and more turned off of it because it's just, this puzzle piece does not fit. You need another line of puzzle pieces over here before you could even begin to put this puzzle piece of henchmen into the rest of the game. And they have no interest in designing that buffer that's quite necessary for them to introduce a lot of different mechanics.
The whole thing where it's not just one thing. The game changes in this one way, and that adds a feedback loop where now it changes over here some more, and everything is just changing. This is why I find it frankly absurd to treat 5e as an old school game,
right?
Because you can't sub out one thing. It does all tie into each other. And you brought up the idea of 5e moving slow, and the whole feedback loop thing. The part of you have the fewer player characters, but then combat also takes up more time for each player to take their turn, which gets you to individual initiative. All this stuff just kind of ends up changing all at once and supporting each other and forcing it to keep its new shape.
Yes.
So it's like hard to like you said. I mean, it's like fitting a puzzle piece from the wrong puzzle into the system. Saving
throws work a specific way in 5th edition, such that they're always going to be the slowest they could possibly be. I'm going to have to, I cast Fireball, I hit 6 enemies, maybe 3 of those are of a different type from one another, or unique to the rest of the group, and now I have to look up 6 different saving throws and roll 6 different saving throws to verify, just in the spirit of verifying whether or not it's a success or fail. But in reality, those bonuses probably don't matter all that much, but they might. Whereas in something like, for instance, 4th edition, you make 1 roll for Fireball. It's against the enemy's reflex stat. And if I roll something like a 20, my DM knows, okay, well, I'm not even going to look at whatever the fuck the goblin's reflex stats are. But there's also a dragon here, so just in case, I'm going to check this out. And that moved a lot faster. But
And
so
you
just
also
more to your
had
point, we can't jam it in.
oh yeah. Yeah, as far as I know, that's the only edition of D&D that had that particular interaction, where it's basically like reflex is your armor class for trying to dodge shit.
Yeah.
It's not bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure 13th Age does the same thing, and it also has it where even if you if certain things miss, there's still a damage value. So there's like a constant shifting of things. There's nothing. There's not really a round where nothing happens, even if everybody misses, which I think is
Right.
interesting. Interesting design.
It makes it a little bit easier to balance certain things. We're not worrying about
Oh, yeah.
all right. I don't know. It's just a different design constraint. And when you're thinking about things like, all right, what makes the game move faster? Like, if I introduce mass combat to the game, which I recently did in Chilmus Valley, it has to, at the very least, one possible expression of it has to work in a way such that I can do it behind the screen on my own without involving the players whatsoever while running a combat, because 5th edition combat takes too long. So if I then further layer like something like mass combat on top of those folks, it's going to pose an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I could also have them do things where like I'm able to run more involved and complex combats outside the context of a session, or I can have the players engage with only the mass combat structure and not the individual combat structure by and large. But yeah, so I'll just like Particulars was saying, you just can't jam these things in. It's very this edition was designed as a mousetrap that would clamp down on you and then would not be subject to any changes going forward outside of its initial scope. Character building is within its initial scope, at the very least at first level, and then not as much going forward. Individually focused combats are within their scope, but exploration is not, social play is not, mass combat is not, domain play is not. Maybe crafting. They've made some pitiful attempts at it in the past.
Yeah. I feel like the only mode of play that's really supported is just the epic adventure linear play for the most part. I feel like that's what the game is really made for, as far as the things that they offer, and that's about it. And that's with the combat, I feel like getting in the way of it a lot. I don't know. Like, I feel like the way that a lot of people play 5e is something that I would prefer to just play Dungeon World instead. Just
it's weird to me that we don't have any quick resolution rules for combat.
Well, I mean, that's the game, though. Combat is the game. Like that's what they offer. Is pretty much that's it. And you're supposed to have a hell of a lot.
And I were talking about this a few days ago about a completely separate game, Slay the Spire. And while combat is the entire game of Slay the Spire, I feel like maybe the more interesting expression of Slay the Spire might be, as Party said. Party, do you want to relay what your thought about that was?
So Slay the Spire is a card game. It's a roguelike card deck builder. So over time, you have battles using your cards, and you build a deck over time, winning cards after battles or through treasure chests or whatever. And rather than have to manually play out these combats, forget the combats. The deck building is the fun part of the game. Let me just let me hit an auto battle button or something to prove that my deck building skills are where it's at, because the deck building is the interesting part of the game. It would be funny. It's certainly funny to consider the idea of a 5e equivalent of that, or an 1D&D equivalent of that, where the resolution of combat is way simpler and you roll way fewer dice. I mean, I do wonder if all that is necessary. I do wonder if the game could be simplified on the DM side in a way that would speed things up. It's interesting to me that I feel like the game being as complex as it is on the DM side is extremely degenerate. Like the players have complained whenever the DM side of the game doesn't like those don't look like characters that I built as a player. It's like no one cared. Like you're not allowed to say that. That's really stupid. That it doesn't matter if the DM side looks exactly like the player side. What matters is can the DM actually run the game and have it be fun. And I feel like there's got to be improvements they could make. And so far I haven't seen anything about One D&D that suggests to me they're planning to make the game any easier to run, to resolve their DM problem that may or may not exist, depending on if you agree with Ye Old Geek on that one.
I'm very curious to see what their monster design is going to look like, and NPCs.
It's gonna be bad.
Well, I mean, theoretically, we'd like to see something where they use some of their lessons from 4E, I guess, as far as like giving monsters, making them less like just a stat block with a bunch of spells and things, and kind of like making the reliance a little bit more on unique actions and things that they do and behaviors and I don't know, stuff like that.
I think WotC understands that they're completely incompetent design team, which is insufficient to build anything other than a large sack of hit points with a mediocre attack bonus, is a problem that has been solved by third-party designers primarily. People are still just going to use, I think, Cobalt Press or Flea Mortals coming out from MCDM, the various, and there's plenty of other third-party monster books. The most common theme of which are either to introduce interesting tactical decisions copied out of 4th edition, or asymmetrical challenges, like ignoring like diseases, curses, and stuff like that, which have some specific description in them that prevents use of the more common panaceas that can be provided by any cleric, druid, or paladin. So I think they understand, at least implicitly, that they were a lost cause, even if they might never generate the human intelligence necessary to express it. But or I should say mimic, not generate. But yeah, it's going to be bad. It's just going to be bad. And I'd be far more interested, given that those designers can only generate large sacks of hit points. I'd be far more interested in something like a quick resolution thing. All right, just tell me how my character did. Let me roll percentile dice or something. Aaron, before you go, I'm not Xanatrix. I definitely don't sound like him. I was on about 6 or 7 of the level up 5e playtest things. You'll hear from me on the Warlock, Ranger, Fighter, Warlord, and Character Origins, and the Destiny document.
You're complaining about the sex of hit points. Does make me think a simple thing that you could do to make the game easier to run: utterly slash the hit point bloat down to much smaller numbers. It's much easier to work with smaller numbers than it is to work with 3-digit numbers. Yes.
No, and a 3-digit, all you have to do is get to CR3 before 3-digit hit point numbers come in. But a CR3 creature, if it only has, because this goes to your point about building the monsters and the characters along the same lines, monster to hit bonuses work identically to how the characters work. So you could have a CR3 creature, which has like 100 hit points, but its proficiency bonus is +2. And if it's whatever its feature that, its primary ability score for making attack rolls is just a +1 or +2, you could have a CR3 creature with 100-something hit points that only has a +3 or +4 to hit. And they never hit a single PC across the course of an entire combat. That takes something like 3 or 4 rounds for the players to actually burn through all those hit points. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's another thing where the game sort of encourages min-maxing. We got to get... if I don't min-max, this boring ass combat is going to last 4 hours, but if we min max, we can make it take 1 hour.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess the thing is, if their design seems to be around making combat the primary focus of the game, that they need to be good at making combat interesting. I guess that's our takeaway. Whereas, when it comes to the more classic editions, is combat like a terribly interesting thing? Not when you're in the middle of it. You're usually kind of resolving your tactics that you've already planned out, and deciding if you need to retreat or not.
Right.
I do think, that does happen in old school combats where they take 2 or 3 rounds and it's just rolling off. But I do think the best combats, the ones that are the most memorable, are the ones where the state is shifting enough from round to round that you feel compelled, like, what are we going to do this round? We gotta come up with something. I happened to run a combat like that yesterday, just because one of the players, part of it is the thing where the characters are hitting 0, and now it's like, okay, how do we save this character? We got to drag them away, feed them a health potion, or what spells you're going to use. To me, the whole that sounds like a mudcore problem, where it's just 2 sides hacking and slashing at each other.
I don't know. So yeah, you can use magic items. You can do stuff like that. It's I feel like part of it is the fact that in first edition you are actively discouraged from moving around the battlefield too much unless your opponent is slain. Just because if you're like doing a withdrawal, then you're not killing it, and you're not getting that far away from it really, because you're only getting like half your movement, I think. You can't move and attack. So because you're doing less movement and things like that, you're restricted on what a lot of your options are. It just, I don't know, it just feels different. And a lot of your spells that you have at your disposal, you've already determined how many of what spell you're going to use per day. So you're not going to be like poring over all of your spells to see, I have all these slots and I have all these prepared. So which ones do I want to, it's just, you've already kind of set your trap in a lot of ways, as far as like how you're going to let things unfold. I don't know.
It can go both ways. I have been in combats where it's a sure thing and we've planned it out. We know what we're going to do. I have been in an AD&D combat where we didn't understand how threatening the monster was, so we waited. We did not use a spell in the first round. We waited to see if it made sense in the second or third round. Some of that is DM ruling in terms of, can a second rank character pull someone out of the first rank, and then the remaining characters close ranks so that there's no risk involved. You just get the guy out. In terms of movement, that potentially depends on, are there multiple locations in one battle where melee is happening over here and also over here, that you would actually care about moving between the positions to risk taking extra hits or risk wasting turns where you don't do anything, where you just move. I don't know. It's kind of if I was running a game an old school game where I kept having boring combats over and over, I would try to change things up, either with more interesting terrain, more interesting monsters. I would start to feel bad if every combat started to look the same and feel very rote.
Yeah. And that's been a problem in 5th edition and 3rd edition, usually for different reasons. 3rd edition was an issue because people would cast the same spells over and over and over again and prepare for every combat with the same spells. And then they, here's my 15 different duration effects. And then I walk in and the combat is over before it even starts. But we have to go through all the hit point grind anyways. Whereas in 5th edition, it's like the opposite problem. Everybody casts, because duration effects are no longer permitted to overlap broadly. I don't know why they even have any duration effects that don't have the concentration tag. That's one thing that they changed in the cleric revision. was they got rid of they added the spell, the concentration tag to spiritual weapon because they're following their natural human impulse to cause maximal suffering wherever they can find it. And I don't know why they just don't say blanket. No duration effects are allowed to overlap from the same character at this point because that's what they mean, and clearly they just missed some by accident. But now the combats look the same on that round. Instead of having a bunch of different duration effects, I cast one duration effect on the first round because that's when it's most optimal to do so, and then I follow it up with 2 or 3 fireballs until the combat ends.
Yeah.
So there's no like hijinks focus play. Whereas, funnily enough, I guess in Princess BX game there was a little bit of hijinks anytime I participated. Even when I was playing a wizard, I had a wizard with a half decent strength and a pretty decent dexterity as well. And I think I said, okay, well, I'm going to focus on equipment outside of my one spell that I use. So I brought a lasso along with me, and Labyrinth Lord has rules for grappling with ropes, I think.
I think my AD&D magic user has the most melee kills of any character in the group.
That's awesome.
He's stood in the second rank, hitting things with his quarterstaff. He's killed at least 10 people by clubbing them in the head.
I thought you were going to say that he's casting sleep using a cloak of elven kind and slitting their throats. That's what the
not even counting that.
That's what the magic user in my AD&D first edition game was doing. He happened to find cloak of elven kind, and he would cast sleep on enemies and just go up. It was a pretty beautiful thing.
K5K says something interesting.
Well, kind of interesting. I was going to hassle him.
Yes. It's a little... See, the thing about... Okay. In 5th edition, for instance, damage is key. Or damage is king, I should say. All priorities can be given to damage, and it will reliably produce wins faster for your party. However, a lot of high damage options, like, for instance, a champion fighter, are horrifically boring. You just do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And so some people do give priority in these games, expanding the number of acceptable builds from 15 to maybe something like 30, in terms of the interesting choices that they have and the dynamism that they bring to the combat, where their power, in a sense, is in introducing state changes to the combat and changes to how the scenario is going to play out.
I was going to back up a bit broader and approach that, because the whole idea that the game doesn't work, so now we're just going to pretend to play it and screw around. First of all, I don't think you should have to do that. I think they could design a game where you could, you're not stuck. Have a fun game in the first place, I guess, is the thing. But then it's the social dynamic becomes so like strained and hard when players are kind of pretending to play and just guessing at what is acceptable. The idea that everyone is going to have handicaps, everyone's going to collectively agree to handicap themselves, but like the specifics of that handicap are kind of unknowable. It just ends up feeling really, I don't know how to describe it. It feels really gross.
Yeah, I've never been in a situation where everybody was kind of expected to do that necessarily, but
feels like a suicide pact.
I often did it to myself just because that was the only way I could introduce any kind of I don't know, feeling of difficulty, as if I'm shooting myself in the
it's
foot.
a suicide pact where everybody has agreed to a different method of killing themselves.
Well, it's one of those things where the outcome. Okay, everyone agrees to handicap themselves, and everyone's happy, and then all of a sudden something actually bad happens, and the consequences hit the group in the face like a ton of bricks, and now all of a sudden it's a blame game, and everyone's mad at each other.
Yeah, maybe one person's handicap did not take effect in whatever has brought the party ruin, and now that person is really in trouble because they had a moment of accidental effectiveness in whatever was supposed to grind the party to dust.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was I hate to keep going to the well of World of Warcraft, but there was a video on YouTube I saw the other day called "Why It's Rude to Suck at World of Warcraft." And
You saw this?
Yeah, and one of the examples in the video was in the game's early days. There was a guy who RP walked everywhere. Sorry, role playing walked. He would set it so his character walked everywhere, and he had no shoes on. His character wouldn't wear boots. It was the barefoot guy who walked everywhere. The problem is, in a raid setting, the 40-man content where you're expected to perform to certain expectations, your boots have statistics on them that improve your damage output and so on. So now you're making a less optimal choice, and that unoptimal choice is people put up with it because they like you, up until the point where the raid starts losing and everyone dies. And now you just played for an hour and nobody got anything. And I feel like that same thing would happen. And I feel like I've actually probably played and seen in games where that legitimately has happened, where people agreed for everyone to be the guy without boots on. And it's fine up until the moment where now someone's dead. And now all of a sudden everyone hates each other. Why did we put ourselves in this position in the first place? This stupid game and you stupid people, and now everyone's mad.
That's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I don't think I just would rather play a game that never put you in that position in the first place, that never offered you the chance to have a strange social dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Well, the answer clearly is to play first edition, or play first edition. I'll even say second, just because I had good experiences with second, but I know people have different feelings on that. But yeah, I think that there's another conversation to be had about maybe we should hold players to higher standards. You know, that they should try and be good at the game.
I mean, have you ever played in a game where the magic user doesn't? I talked about my magic user who's gotten 10 kills or more by hitting things with his quarterstaff. Have you ever played in a game where the magic user casts his spell and then stands off in the back and does nothing and says he's doing nothing when he could easily, and the DM keeps hinting at him like, you can stand in the second rank and just swing your quarterstaff and there's literally no risk.
You throw a dart. You're proficient in darts.
And then 2 players are now dead because the magic user did not add in their extra damage to the party. 5e is that, to me, what 5e is with all its character build options is that taken up to 11, where now people who intended to help the party and be good can end up stuck with bad options, and they didn't understand that they were going to be making the party worse off.
Right.
And it's harder to convince people that the options they chose are wrong, because it's like, what do you mean they're wrong? They're in the book, aren't they? They're not. You're telling me these options are invalid? And it's even worse.
You're telling me WotC put 6 of 15 core class features in this class were actually ribbon abilities that have no impact or connection to the rest of the game?
I do want to remind everyone that in 3rd edition, I think it was Monty Cook who explicitly stated they put bad options in the game on purpose, that taking them was intentional. Like, you were actually legitimately wrong. The designers put an option in that taking it was intended to be wrong.
He should have been flown to Papua New Guinea and given over to the locals to do as they wish. For one, having done that; 2, for having stated it publicly.
I have to, I guess, defend the man because I like Numenera, and I'll attempt to defend him by saying he was young and stupid and didn't know what he was doing, and he's learned since then.
Yes, but that opinion has certainly infected tabletop RPG design since. were the idea that in tabletop RPGs, where you should be able to include a plethora of good options, which are far more expansive and far more valuable than those you might find in video games. People focus even more on providing trap options. I've had to deal with this with a number of my freelancers over the years, or they just introduce just shit. It's like, well, okay, we're playing a card-based game. This person has a limited number of draws that come into their hand, and you've included this card here that at present does not interact with the rest of the game. Now we could introduce, if you want to, this card, which helps you differentiate between different trails of different creatures, which is something that might come into play in a video game, where you have a visual indication of different trails of different creatures, like you're playing Red Dead 2 or something. But it's a little bit harder to make use of in something like a tabletop RPG. Like, unless something else is added to this, it's just a trap. It's just bad. This person has encountered a fail state just by looking at this card, much less adding it to their deck or drawing it thereafter. It's poison. It's cancerous. It's all throughout the industry.
I think this is an interesting comment here. Pyrat says, the old edition, you could play a crap character because it was about your equipment and your brain, not your feats and features. I think like it's interesting as a springboard to consider, because we're talking about a little bit about magic users as well, that it was very easy for you to end up with a magic user that didn't really have any way of being that particularly useful in first edition, and just not by choices, just by pure circumstance, because you have to roll to see what you get. Right. Your starting spells are randomly determined, and whether or not you can learn sleep, for instance, is based off of your intelligence percentile roll. And if you miss it, you miss it. And whenever you look at what kinds of other spells, well, hopefully you can get Charm Person. If you can't get Charm Person, you can't get Sleep. Whew. Like you're in a bad situation. At that point, you're kind of at the mercy. And we were talking about you could stand in the second row. Yes, you could. I don't know. Were you able to do that with a quarterstaff in 1E and use it that way? I can't remember. But I know you could in some versions. But then darts, you talked about darts. I mean, you're just as likely to hit one of your allies as you are a monster, because it's randomly determined who you're going to hit, right, based on the proportions. So I mean, if there's one monster that's really big and several allies, then there's a decent chance that you end up hitting an ally.
Yeah, that was the case. I think it was an ogre that I used the darts on. I mean, that was after trying to trap its hand with a lasso, which I think worked for a hot second.
Yeah. I mean, there's a proportions as far as size goes and all that in 1E, which I think is important. But even so, just the idea that you might end up accidentally killing one of your allies makes it where it's a risky proposal. If there's just it gets to be a point where there may not be much that you can really do. Unless you have these certain circumstances in place. And then at that point, you just have to be really creative. You have to hire people.
I've been looking in the book for the specific citation on magic user spells at first level and thereafter. In the AD&D DMG, page 39, there is some limits on what spells the character will get. And it does suggest that you may allow a player to choose. If you may, particularly difficult, they can choose which of the offensive spells they want, which defensive spell, etc., etc. So while you might not get sleep, you would be potentially guaranteed Burning Hands, Charm Person, Magic Missile, Enlarge. So there's some options that get nothing.
Yeah,
I do think it actually is probably appropriate to let the player pick. I haven't played in a whole lot of AD&D games, which is to say I've played in one main campaign where the DM has allowed us to choose, and I do feel that that's appropriate.
I don't know. I didn't allow them to choose, but
Was it just Was it just choosing for your starter, or was it choosing for all of your additional gain spells thereafter?
No, just well, okay. So you don't you roll to see which ones you start with, and then for which ones you're able to learn, you have to make an intelligence roll on the you have to pass those. There's a minimum number that you can learn per level just to make sure that you don't end up with never getting any new spells. But then there's the maximum to guarantee that intelligence being high is important.
Yeah, I'm just re-examining this because last night I finally rolled up somebody who qualifies for an illusionist.
Oh, so while I generally agree with what Pyrat was saying, I have seen people roll up a fighter and they take their 18 and they don't assign it strength. Why do people do this to us? So it is possible to build characters wrong, and that does reduce your combat effectiveness. I do agree generally that yes, the old school style of play and the old school games and modules especially much more heavily reward intelligence, player skill. So it's not just about your stats, but it's still a bit of a war game. You will have some combats eventually. The idea, there's a old school, an OSR comment that would be like, we played a whole session and never rolled any dice. That's an overreaction in my mind. Yes, in the 5e game where you're rolling skill checks every 5 seconds to look at a glass. What is this glass? That sucks. But I sometimes when I'm, especially if I go like 2 hours and we haven't fought anything, I'm going to pick a fight on purpose because I want to roll dice and smash something's head in. It's dumb fun to me. I like it.
Right. Yeah. XP bonuses. Yeah, there's a few different interesting comments here. I'll say this, the only new school game I've come across thus far that I've not designed that did this is Lancer. But Lancer is a game about mechs in which your character abilities are all connected to a physical, tangible object that exists only for that purpose. So Lancer, to some extent, to the degree it's a character building game, really it's an equipment building game where you have.
If you want a game where you control a ghost possessing an alien inside of a human controlling him, and the human is inside of a mech which is driving a tank. And you build characters one after the other.
All right. You calling my darts useless, K5K asks. Kind of, in a way. Like they're great in that you get 3 throws, or like even more than that potentially at the beginning of combat. But I feel like once you're engaged in a melee, unless there are just a shit ton of bad guys, if your DM is enforcing that rule, then I feel like it's usually a losing proposition. I found myself feeling bad for the magic users and just being like, they're big enough. You'll hit them probably. The proportions are better. I was kind of nice when it came to that, just because like I didn't want them to just sit there and do nothing. But I feel like that's what the rule encourages, is that you use it before they're engaged in melee. Then after that, well, even then you can't really use it because the range is so poor. So
I don't think it's too. So yet another one of my. So the way the AD&D game I'm in has been ruled. If the enemies are coming at you and you're going to hold still, I have thrown a silver dagger across the room, hit some dude charging at us in the face. He drops dead. And then when they're in melee, we've had the quarterstaff. We've allowed the quarterstaff to be used from the second rank. So the magic user is not having to risk taking a hit and dying because he only has 2 hit points or whatever, which gives them something to do. Is that strictly by the book? I thought it was, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I'd have to reread. I don't remember us using it that way because I think quarterstaff. I don't think. Well, I mean, yeah, I just I feel like that's a rule that I used in BX. Was it they were able to do that? But I don't know. Maybe somebody with more recent experience could say.
I'm just gonna scroll through the book until I find it. Eventually, I'll find the weapon table or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it is on the weapon table, that specific thing. Which I should just pull out my DM screen because it has all that shit on it. Okay, weapons, notes. All right, quarterstaff. I don't see anything on it there. Is there anything about that at all? I mean, you have weapon length. Okay, weapon length. So that might feed into it a little bit. Quarterstaff. 6 feet to 8 feet.
Oh, in terms of allowing the staff to work from the second rank, I feel like that's legitimate. The question was whether in my mind, the question was whether a magic user is even allowed to fight with a quarterstaff, which they are. Yes. Daggers, darts, and staves.
I think they get to choose which one they want to be proficient in. So I mean, they could use something else, but they would be doing it at like a -5 or something to that effect.
Yeah, the magic user has very strict weapon proficiencies. Nobody tell my DM using daggers and quarterstaves with equal amounts of proficiency, even though I think I probably do only get one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I would probably rule against it. I don't know. But EOTB says 1E doesn't specify a list of second rank weapons. It's up to the DM.
8 feet? That's a thumbs up from me.
I mean, yeah, but you're also like doing it around people. And you know, the whole concept of the mass, the melee being a kind of a chaotic environment where you're not even exactly deciding exactly which target you're attacking if they're, you know, like in a ranking kind of situation. I don't know. I might allow it at a penalty or something. That's just me.
That sounds like Mudcore talk to me.
No, because there are gonna be magic items. There are gonna be plenty of scrolls.
Everything I don't like is Mudcore.
Everything I don't like is Mudcore.
Yes.
Well, but it's reasonable not to allow it. He goes by length. So Zerbus allows it. See, spears. I feel like pikes. You know, for sure. You know, have some pikes behind. You know, to take the chargers. You know, in second rank. But
yeah, I mean, if 3 men are supposed to be able to stand abreast in a 10-foot corridor, and I think it's fair to assume that folks are actually getting pretty tightly packed in there. So something like a quarterstaff, like leaning forward in the context of a quarterstaff, or spear or something like that. Something with a little bit of length to it is perfectly reasonable. I mean, whereas you might not allow something like a sword.
A lot of these things, think about it from a game design perspective. Do you want the magic user to be able to do something during the round? And it's okay, we can.
No, I want them to cry themselves to sleep, you know, for their poor choices until they're high enough level that they dominate the game.
Yeah, I want them to be able to do something. So if I can find something that reasonably justifies it, like the length of a quarterstaff, perfect. That just means that gameplay and aesthetics have matched, and that's the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh yeah, I definitely would not bring a pike to a dungeon. I've actually had that conversation with one of the players before who used to carry around a pike all the time. I'm not sure if they knew like just how long pikes are. And it's just like,
Oops.
let's not bring the pike indoors in this little family hovel. I don't think that's a good idea. It might knock over some things. But I don't know. Maybe y'all convinced me. I mean, I haven't had to think about it for a while. But you know, I do think that you know, having somebody just literally have nothing to do is not favorable. You know,
Having the magic user roll a d6 damage with probably no strength bonus, I don't think it's stepping on anyone's toes. The fighters are going to have, especially if you're using the AD&D stat gen methods, or maybe something even letting them roll up a couple times, they're going to end up with pretty, like, I had like an 1876 fighter, which is probably like, I don't know, you got at least +2 to hit, and I think like +4 damage or something. And you're rolling a d8 weapon probably, if not a d10 or d12. So it's not like the magic user is really infringing on the role of the fighters.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's important to acknowledge that the magic user is only able to do that on account of a proficient fighter. So the fighter having filled his character role and excelling at it maybe by accident, maybe by player actions, maybe by both, is what, if that's what's allowing the magic user to engage in a little bit of melee combat. I think it adds to their sense of niche protection, or further avoid stepping on anybody's toes.
Yeah, so you're holding the fact that the fighter is holding the line, you know, in order to make this possible is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. EOTB says if a DM wants to compromise, can say the staff drops from 1d4 to 1d4 from second rank, as it is now poking more than cracking over the head, as a spear is 1d6 as a pointy tip. I think that's fair.
1d4 is typically used as the butt end of a given object, like
It's
a
your club,
glaive or quarterstaff or something. Yeah,
I like it. Well, I feel like we've you know, touched on the topic that we set out to. I set out. Overall, I kind of like a lot of the changes that they've done to feats. I think that the fact that they took away the must-have business is important. I'm curious to see what they're going to do later. I was planning on getting into spells and comparing, you know, spells through the editions and stuff, but we didn't really get around to it. But maybe some other time. I feel like spells through the editions would be an interesting thing to approach, just to see, you know, how far the mighty have fallen.
That's an easy topic to go into if it's through all the editions, because we can just steal from Delta. Delta's D&D blog. He does a lot of those comparisons over the years. We'll just say everything that he said and pretend that it was our original ideas.
Absolutely,
great idea. Well, people were pointing out
some
that they
haven't even
disagreed
changed through the edition. So,
oh, that's true. People were pointing out that they believe that the article he did on to hit versus armor class was inaccurate, or not that it was inaccurate, but it was. I think
I can finally explain this fully and what happened and why, if we really want me to speak to it.
I do. I want this on video because it's so good.
Here is the after going through it several times, trying to figure out what is going on here, because it seemed like Delta had found something, and it's kind of one of those classic cases of statistics not telling the whole truth, and getting a trend appears to exist, but it's not actually there. Or the missing component is that in AD&D, compared with chainmail, AD&D just makes armor stronger and more beneficial across the board. So when Delta does the math and happens to find out that a mace has seemingly not been ported over correctly into AD&D. That is technically true, but it's only true in the sense that that same logic applies to every weapon. Every weapon has been made slightly worse against armor. The relationship of the mace to all other weapons, its relative strength, hasn't changed.
Right, versus its intended targets.
Yeah. Now there were a few little finagling in terms of some of the numbers, but in generally speaking, the situations in which you would prefer a mace are, in theory, the same. The fact that AD&D makes armor more powerful across the board changes the dynamic a bit, because I mean that might change your decision making regardless of how any given weapon functions. So in the original, basically the main thing is you scroll down right where you're at, where he comes across the zeros across the board. Maces have 0 capacity to help you punch and here's the roll for the Mason Greyhawk. So in chainmail, it's the same. You have to, on a 2d6 roll, you have to roll an 8 or better, or I think there's a 9 and a 7 in there somewhere. But you roll 2d6, you have to roll an 8 or better, which means that no matter what armor type you're up against, the roll is basically the same. Whereas in Greyhawk, what you would expect to find, if armor had the same relative value in Greyhawk or AD&D, you would expect that mace row, instead of being 0, mostly zeros, you would expect it to improve over time. The reason it doesn't improve over time is not because of the weapons, it's because armor in general was intentionally buffed across the board. So the fact that the curve has been apparently flattened is actually like every weapon has had this done to it in a sense. So the relative value of the mace is still the same. So his conclusion is wrong. Basically, he looks at all the data. All of his data is correct. It's just that his conclusion is wrong because he has failed to notice the assumption that an AD&D armor is better.
Yeah, the numbers have given him what appears to be an explicit outlier, but as the numbers are used within the game, they do not support his conclusion, which is very common in tabletop RPGs.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an easy mistake to make. It took me several attempts to finally understand it. So, I mean, I wouldn't give him too much grief over it. I wouldn't. I certainly, I talked to the guy once. He seemed nice. He's got. I like his blog articles, so I'm not gonna get too hung up about it.
Right.
I did fire one of my recent freelancers for making a similar mistake, though. A data scientist who kept insisting that everything in the game was quantifiable, and if some design decision appeared to not be quantifiable, it's simply because we hadn't collected enough data about it. This person was very insistent that everything could be reduced to a number within the game's context, and it was just okay. I can't deal with this person anymore. I'm sorry.
I mean, even if that were hypothetically, technically true, with infinite information, with like omniscience, I mean, why bother to make that point?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be omniscient. You will never know everything. You're never going to know. There's always risks and trade-offs, even in a 5e type game.
I figure one of the things that they would teach you in data science is that not everything was literally quantifiable. That you were, I don't know. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe I'm wrong. Aaron B. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. It appears French, and so we should probably boot him from the chat. But he does ask the question: if y'all could become lead designers of One D&D, what would you do differently?
Shit.
Make the game easier for DMs to run.
Yeah.
I would put a lot of focus in making dungeon crawling matter, and make it where resources were, more important, because I feel like that's something that's lacking now. The resources that matter now are just spell slots and HP. and your some of your daily features. But arrows aren't really like almost nobody tracks arrows now. Encumbrance is kind of an optional rule. There's just I would basically I would figure the game in such a way that it is a dungeon crawler, that if people chose to, they could decide to go against that. They're going to do it anyway. They can go ahead and do it. But I would at least make sure that what the game's identity is done well.
Default supported mode of play being survival horror, more or less.
More or less. Yeah.
You would make it so it's a game about delving dungeons and slaying dragons.
Right.
There it is.
Yeah. I feel like that's been lost for a long time.
I would probably slash about 90% of the character abilities, but then place them into different, basically compartmentalize them. Where I said, okay, here are the exploration abilities of a ranger, fighter, rogue, etc., etc. Here are the combat abilities of a ranger, fighter, rogue, etc., etc. Here are the social abilities of a ranger, fighter, rogue, etc., etc. And I would have these. I would have the divisions between these features be extremely explicit and have a small note about attempting to improvise a given feature's effects in the context of one mode of play, of a feature's effects when it was from one mode of play. If the player attempted to use it in a different mode of play, I would just make those divisions significantly harder. Because I think working with that particular design team, I don't think that they're able to. I think they're struggling. I mean, they remove one of the things I noticed was in the Ranger, they removed the majority of the ribbon abilities. Though I was hoping that they would finally just take an opportunity to fix those abilities and make them not ribbons. But they have virtually everything in the Ranger now in the playtest that they offered has just a basic combat function. And it's like, okay, they're acknowledging that they don't know how to design exploration. They don't know how to design social play, but I feel like if they were given the appropriate bounding boxes, they might be able to. But as it stands now, they don't know how to cram multiple modes of play into a given character class. And I think I would just go in and remove it from the table. I think that the simply removing it from the table that shows you what you get as part of your character class would be sufficient to put these guys in a mindset where they could start designing features for exploration, social play, combat, and make these and keep these activities separate.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. I do think there's a lot of value in trying to express, kind of like what each class's role is in the different modes of play, because it's just kind of left blank, really. It's, well, you got a skill system, figure it out.
Yeah.
And
when we were designing Shilma's Valley, we made explicit exploration roles. Was it camper, cook, entertainer, fisher, hunter, survivalist, tracker, and vanguard, I believe were all of them. And then all the different classes have different benefits depending on what roles they slot into for the exploration thing. And some of them are better than others, and some of them are more niche than others, but it's according to, it's primarily according to, we expect the barbarian and the ranger to excel in the context of an exploration session. So, and I would just take that approach with One D&D.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I need to take some time to relax. I'm gonna play some Sea of Thieves maybe. I don't know. Just kind of goof around. But it was good having the chat with everybody. Thank you everybody who showed up. Guys, why don't you can say like where they can find you.
Join Aaron's Discord.
I guess I should include a link for that.
Don't read my
Absolutely.
post.
No, you
Much
should
nicer-
join there in
Much
Discord.
nicer on camera, I think.
It's you can find me at Gelatinous Rube on YouTube. I have a video coming out today. It is late, unfortunately, but I have a video coming out today on using AI to generate dungeons. And don't tell anybody, but it is sort of just a Trojan horse to introduce people to Appendix A. Just the random dungeon generators in the AD&D DMG.
I do actually have a ransacgames.com website, but I never
Oh,
update it,
really?
and don't go there.
Work in progress. It'll get there. All right. Well, I appreciate again everybody showing up, having something to say. I think maybe the next time we'll have one where we're like a lot more specific and owned in on something. We kind of jumped around, but it's been a while since we've all been able to talk. So I think it was, I don't know, for me it was just fun, getting to reconnect. And I've got some more videos I'm planning on making soon. So, all right. Well, y'all take it easy. Thanks for everything. And if I don't see you again before the holidays, happy holidays.
Peace. Merry Christmas, all.
Yeah.